To order. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the School District of Waukesha's Board of Education Teaching and Learning Committee meeting for Tuesday, July 6, 2021. We do have one board member that's excused tonight. Bill Baumgart will not be here. We'll begin our agenda this evening under general business. Sue, could you verify that the meeting has been properly posted?
Yes, it has.
Thank you very much. Now is the opportunity for public comment to our committee this evening. Sue, do we have any more that have signed up?
Nope, that was it.
Thank you. I'm going to read a statement here before we begin. We are now in the section of our meeting where there is an opportunity for individuals to speak. Each individual will be limited to 3 minutes. Could I have someone signal to the 2.5 minute mark? Amanda will do that. Ms. Roddy, thank you. So she will signal when it's the 2.5 minute mark for you to wrap up your comments. We expect all speakers to honor our time limit, refrain from using any inappropriate language, and be respectful in your comments. Speakers who do not meet these expectations will be asked by myself to stop speaking, to leave the meeting, to be assisted from the meeting, and or not allowed to speak at future Board of Education meetings. We also expect the audience to be respectful of the speaker and the Board of Education. Each speaker tonight should begin by announcing their name and address. If we have any minors that are speaking, they do not need to announce their address. All of this speaker information will be published in the meeting minutes. We will begin the public comment portion of our meeting tonight with Amy Brooks. So Amy, if you'd please come forward, and welcome.
Hello, my name is Amy Brooks. I'm at 212 West North Street here in Waukesha. I'm an educator and parent in the district. I'm here in support of culturally relevant teaching. Everything our children learn in school is learned through various lenses that shape the way they process information and how they view themselves in the world. With information that is a click away and filtered through all sorts of lenses, students need guidance on how to navigate and interpret it. Teachers must be equipped with the language and methodology of walking our students through this learning. The educators here are committed to their own development in equitable teaching, checking their own lenses, their own biases, to make sure that their students truly can become responsible thinking individuals, and your support is crucial. As a parent of 2 children in this district, I want them to have the opportunities to question things, to work through problems, and to make connections. They see things happening in the world, inequities, struggle, and injustices. Without a context, we can't truly learn or understand it, thereby perpetuating these injustices. Providing a censored, weak, or whitewashed context is harmful and runs counter to our educational goals. It is also a tactic that those in power use to suppress truths that could empower those without it. Our district's mission is to develop in our students the capacity and skills to be community, college, and career ready. If we want our children to be responsible community members, they must know how to interact and respect the diverse members of their communities. If we want our students to be college and career ready, they must be equipped with not just basic reading and writing skills, but analytical, deep thinking skills. To do anything less is to put our students at a grave disadvantage. In Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Paulo Freire said, "There's no such thing as neutral education. Education either functions as an instrument to bring about conformity or freedom." I implore everyone and this board to support and bolster the equity work already started here in Waukesha. I would also suggest doing some reading, learning about the history of Indigenous, Black, Latinx, LGBTQ, and Asian communities. Ensure that these historically marginalized voices can be amplified in our classrooms. And then go out and talk to the people in this community who come from different backgrounds from your own. Learn about what helps their children grow, what makes them feel supported, and then watch how our school district can thrive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. Next this evening, we have Tom Knightsky. Did I pronounce your name right? Last name?
Tom Knightsky.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Tom Knightsky. I reside at 606 Norwood Court in Waukesha. I'm here to talk about activist teaching. Activist teaching insists on the adoption of ideas, dispositions, and philosophies that are intended to challenge, undermine, replace, and or outright destroy long-standing institutions, traditions, and values, to discredit or devalue the moral, religious, or political beliefs of students and their families, and supplant those beliefs with ideologies of an individual educator who holds power over the student. One of the key points here is holds power over the student. Teacher activism seeks to undermine the traditional family of its moral and religious values. It seeks to replace them with the values of a political party or a special interest group. Putting people into categories or groups that seek to put people at odds with one another. This kind of thinking is CRT, critical race theory, once tried in the past by Adolf Hitler, the second Antichrist, as well as communist movements around the world. We need to be teaching our children actual U.S. history, world history, and current events. Those who choose to ignore history are doomed to repeat the failures of the past and lose the lessons from history that brought success to the community. Let the children form opinions of the world with the guidance of their mothers, fathers, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and siblings. Teacher activism caused the problems we have today. Let's choose to end it now in our great Waukesha School District. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Next, we have Monica Whaley. Welcome, Monica, and if you could just start by stating your name and address, please.
Yep. My name is Monica Whaley. I live at 127 Douglas Avenue in Waukesha. I am a parent of a BIPOC student of color at Waukesha South High School. My wife and I have also taught in the district for the last several years. I am here tonight to discuss my concerns regarding the funding, support, and future equity and inclusion in our academic and social environments throughout the district. Regarding CRT and our curriculum, some teach about racism and the constructs that perpetuate it. Racism has been entrenched in our country's history for over 400 years in the lives of BIPOC individuals. What are you afraid of? Denying racism exists is the biggest indicator of systemic racism. Ignoring it because it makes you feel uncomfortable or because you just want to move forward is ignoring the facts of history. There's a huge divide in this community and in the country between maintaining the status quo and change. We must have our learners and communities catch up to what is happening in the larger society. We can no longer ignore the inequities in education, employment, housing, and socioeconomic realities. We must be intentional about looking at the way our unconscious bias can compromise our success as a district. By hiring more diverse educators to teach our diverse learners, we are representing what our communities look like. By offering inclusive curriculum, we acknowledge that students have multiple identities that are shaped by their previous experiences and that a diverse range of personal circumstances influence how they learn. This inclusive education removes barriers and discrimination and improves educational and social outcomes. Regarding the training given by Dr. Holly, it seems so controversial to some board members. He has given all the teachers and administrators the knowledge needed to understand the importance of learning where our students are coming from. The cultural and linguistic makeup of BIPOC families is critical to us as educators if equitable learning is to take place in our classrooms. The current census of the district states that there are 4,117 non-white students in the district. Whites account for 8,236. Another board concern is teachers reporting to families if students are identifying as non-binary or transgendered at school. We are mandatory reporters when there is a suspicion of abuse or neglect. This does not fall under mandatory reporting. We work endlessly to ensure that students feel safe in our classrooms. No amount of learning will take place if they don't feel safe. By violating that right, we are breaking the trusting relationship we're working so hard to establish. The suicide risk for identifying LGBTQ+ is very high. According to the Trevor Project, at least one LGBTQ+ youth attempts suicide in our U.S. every 45 seconds. Homelessness and abuse are also high risks. Why would we put our children in harm's way if they choose not to tell their parents? Inclusive teaching can encourage acceptance by using different pronouns and examples of different lifestyle types of families and relationships. Thank you.
Monica. Next this evening, we have Colleen Benfield. Welcome, Colleen, and if you could begin by stating your name and address, please. Thank you.
Sure. My name is Colleen Benfield. I live at South 53 West 23733 Big Bend Road. Took me about a month to learn that. I'm a graduate of Waukesha South. I have 3 children who attend the Waukesha schools, and for the past 12 years I have taught at Hadfield Elementary, which just so happens to also be my alma mater. Hadfield Elementary's demographics and culture have changed, just like that of the district as a whole. I felt this change most in my 8th year of teaching. At the time I was teaching 2nd grade, and for some reason things just weren't clicking like they should be. At this point I was an experienced teacher, taught this grade level multiple times, and couldn't figure out what wasn't working. It finally dawned on me that for the first time in my teaching career, more than 50% of my students were students of color. I read all that I could find on the topic and over kept hearing about the practices of culturally relevant teaching. I dug in. And the main takeaway I chose to cling to that year was that according to neuroscience, what's the same in all of us is learning occurs when the catalyst is relevant. Meaning we all learn best when we are engaged in a way that is relevant to us. It made perfect sense that something wasn't clicking. I was teaching and lesson planning with the catalyst of a 30-something-year-old white lady, expecting black and brown children, some Spanish-speaking, some immigrants, some homeless, some with incarcerated parents, to magically have the same catalyst for learning as me. The books in my classroom library all had white faces on them. The first change I made was going to the public library and renting as many books as I could find with characters that looked like my students and their families. A very small change, but suddenly I had kids reading. It didn't become a fairy tale school year, but as I slowly changed things and the more I learned, the more engaged the kids became, something I had seen very little of before this. I could have come here today and spout about statistics, achievement gaps, buzzwords, political agendas, etc., but I think our community is tired of hearing about that. I'm speaking specifically today about students. We are the district here to serve children. That is what I'm hired to do. The students should all be at the forefront of what we do. If all students are not finding success, then we need to find ways to make them successful. When we know better teaching strategies exist to meet the needs of our students, then we need to change our teaching.
Thank you very much, Colleen. Next this evening, Michelle Helaska. Welcome, Michelle. If you could begin by stating your name and address, please. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Michelle Helaska. I live at W250 S3337 Hemet Avenue in Waukesha, Wisconsin. And, I wish to express my beliefs on critical race theory or culturally responsive teaching. I believe that teachers, staff, administrators, and Board of Education members and parents, our first and greatest concern must be for the educational welfare of the students attending the public schools, not wokeness. Rather than focus on the basics and making sure all students are proficient in core subjects, valuable classroom time, as well as valuable professional development time, is being spent on equity and activism training. Why have we not made the Pledge of Allegiance a top priority in our schools? When I was in school, we said it every single day, and we were taught to stand and say it. Now it is said only a few times a week, and you don't even have to stand up for it. This is absolutely disappointing. Our country was founded on the principles of equality, not equity, excellence, and equal protection under the law. It was also founded on the principle of every American, no matter the color of our skin, our ethnicity, or our current status in life, we are guaranteed certain unalienable rights by our Creator. Critical race theory replaces these principles and replaces them with the communist ideal of equity. That is, every American, no matter their ability, their work ethic, or moral fiber, should end up achieving the exact same result. CRT also believes that it would be dictated by the almighty government that no matter our individual merit, ability, or talent, we will all end up in the same place and equal place. Where is the motivation in any of these communist ideals? There will be absolutely no desire for a child to do better, to be better, or even want better. We are all Americans, every single one of us. When we start dividing ourselves by race, we cause greater division. And the person who spoke a couple before me is absolutely correct. Our country is completely divided. Our school district is completely divided. Remember, racism works in both ways. One side feels wronged by the other or offended by the other, and in the end, nobody wins. Is that what we really want? I read that critical race theory is being taught in many school districts all across the state and is quickly on its way to fundamentally changing K-12 education in Wisconsin and Waukesha. I do not agree with spending any amount of money towards professional development that only teaches about hating our whiteness. It teaches that anyone of color is a victim, and if you are a victim, then you need to blame someone.
Last speaker this evening, Stacey King. Welcome, Stacey. You can start by stating your name and address, please. Thank you.
I'm Stacey King. I'm at 2915 Rocky Creek Drive in Waukesha. I don't know if I'm going to read this. There are teachers in this room who I love dearly, I have subbed with, and I agree with most of what they say. And they are passionate teachers that love their students, and I know they want the best for them. I've seen it in action. But I would like to say something about critical race theory. It is an ideology created in academia, and I know that we say we're not teaching it, but the ideals are there, okay? So it started in academia in the 70s, and it says that racism exists everywhere, in every person and every system. And the job of a critical theorist is to assess how, not if, racism occurred in any circumstance. How can we not divide our kids if we are teaching them that they are oppressed or the oppressor and that racism exists in everything they do? That is not a fair way to approach our children. If you're looking for racism in everything, you will find racism in everything. You will misconstrue the most innocent thing as being a symbol of racism. I'm not saying racism isn't out there, but it breaks my heart that we would tell a child or tell a teacher that they are racist and they can't do anything about it. My concern is also for people who don't understand what this theory really is. Bill Baumgart believes that people who oppose equity training in CRT do not want to educate black students. He clearly has not read a single email, listened to anything regarding CRT, or read a single piece of literature about CRT. Ms. Roddy is on the equity committee, but has never reported to the board what's happening. So here's some questions. Why is this all being done in secrecy? Why did our administration jump to put a social justice statement on our website last summer and then quickly take it down last week? Are teachers required to do the DPI equity training? I watched some of it. It's horrific and divisive. Where has equity training in CRT been successful? Why? What kind of research did you do? And why do you feel Cherokee Holly was the answer to our discipline disparities? And I also want to know, I'm going to skip a lot of this, why don't we have books about black conservatives for our students? I spent hours searching our library system. There's not one book about or by Candace Owens. I'm blanking here. Larry Elder, Thomas Sowell. I can go on about this list. They're not there, but we have plenty of books about Cardi B, BLM, white privilege, and white fragility.
Thank you.
Anyone else this evening that would like to address the committee? Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Moving on to our action items. The first action item is the approval of the Teaching and Learning Committee meeting minutes from our June 1st, 2021 meeting. Mr. Como.
I move
Thank you.
approval of the minutes as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Como.
Second.
Ms. Roddy? Any discussion, corrections on the minutes? Okay, seeing none. All in favor of the approval of the minutes from June 1st, 2021, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes Sue 4-0. Next this evening, under action items, we are looking at the approval of our School District of Waukesha 2021-2022 educational standards. This is an annual notice required by the state of Wisconsin from our school district. We have Rachel Herman, our Director of Secondary Learning, and also Kristen Higgins, the principal at North High School, here to present this action item. And welcome, Kristen and Rachel.
Yes, Kristen, we're going to let Kristen off the hook for this one. Yes, Kristen's here for the next one.
Oh, the next one, okay.
That's
Sorry.
okay. That's okay.
Okay.
So good
We'll get her on
evening.
the next one then.
Yeah.
Sure don't want to join in.
We'll get her on the next one.
Support Rachel on this.
She's moral support for me. Good evening, everybody. So we, as you know, in Waukesha are committed to developing rigorous academic standards, and we are also committed to, of course, developing our teachers to differentiate their instruction, so that all students can achieve high levels around those academic standards. And so this is an annual item, and we are seeking action to approve the annual notice of the student educational standards as required by the 2015 Wisconsin Act 55, which would notify the parent and guardians of students enrolled in the school district of these academic standards that will be in effect for the following school year. And so at this point in time, I would take any questions that you have around those standards.
Mr. Coleman.
Just any major changes from last year to this year?
The Wisconsin state standards did in this past year revise their ELA standards, and so we are using those as we go to rewrite the English curriculum. The social studies standards were recently changed in 2018, and math is going to be updated this coming year. So as Wisconsin updates their standards, we will continue to use that in our curricular revision process.
So then what challenges does that present to us to stay on top of that? What do you envision us doing to make sure we're meeting those standards?
Sure. So through our curricular design process, we really make sure that we're aligning the new standards that DPI does release to the curriculum that we are teaching. And so typically the shifts that are made are not game changer shifts, they're typically revisions. And so again, through that curricular design process, we just ensure that we're meeting the rigor of the standard that is set by the state.
Okay.
Anything else? Go ahead, Dr. Piazzik.
Just a follow-up question on the math standards. Since we've recently changed the integrated math curriculum, was that in anticipation of some of these changes?
That was in anticipation, and in fact, Dan Paczynski, who is helping to spearhead our math efforts, was actually someone who served on that committee with the Department of Public Instruction in the rewrite of those standards. So what we have done is in direct alignment to the new standards that are being released. We were part of that pilot group who looked at the new standards coming out. Yep.
I'd be looking for a motion then for the approval of the School District of Waukesha 2021-2022 educational standards. Ms. Roddy.
I'll second that.
Mr. Como. Thank you. Any further discussion? Questions, comments? Okay. All those in favor of the approval of the teaching and learning, approval of the School District of Waukesha 2021-2022 educational standards, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes, Sue, 4-0. Next this evening, we're moving on to our discussion information items. The first item is the high school final grades update presented by Jody Landish, our Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning, and Kristen Higgins, our principal at North High School. So welcome, Jody, and also Kristen.
And Mrs. Herman is having so much fun, she's actually going to put voice to the final grades update. And Principal Higgins, thanks for being here tonight as well.
Awesome.
A hard copy is also, board members, in front of you on your desk this evening.
All right, so we are back to present. We presented some of the data around the semester mark. And so we're back to give you an update around how we ended the year after this crazy pandemic. And so some overall highlights around our data. All three of our face-to-face schools did see an overall decrease in the total percentage of Fs from semester 1 to semester 2. So we were very excited about that. While those decreases did fluctuate pretty dramatically, we were still celebratory that they did in fact see that decrease. Eachieve did not see a decrease, and we're going to go into some of the reasons why we think that that might be a little bit later into the presentations. Our credit recovery efforts, which we did talk to you about at a previous board meeting, were incredibly successful, and we do believe that those contributed to some of those overall decreases in failures. Our teachers, our principals at all three of our sites put in really targeted, individualized plans for students who had to recover multiple courses during the second semester. When we looked at our most failed courses, we saw a similar trend to first semester in that Algebra 1, Geometry, and English 9 were our most failed classes. In addition, though, we saw Human Geography, which is typically not one of our most failed classes, was a semester 2 most failed course. And so what we obviously noticed, that I'm sure you're noticing, is that those are freshman courses for the most part. And so we also did, in the spring, some work with our principals around what some freshman transition plans might need to look like and what some targeted work around our freshman level might need to look like in looking at some of those trends. And then lastly is that as we go into this summer, as we ended the year, we had some really targeted planning around how we are going to continue to close the achievement gap for students going into the following year. Even though we were able to, of course, see that overall decrease in the number of Fs, we still had a number of students who were significantly impacted by the pandemic, by the various learning models that they experienced over the course of the year. And so we know that there's still some really targeted work that's going to need to happen over the course of the 21-22 school year. Kristen's going to talk a little bit about North's success as they saw the most significant decrease in their F data over the course of the semester.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm very proud to be here tonight to share North's data with you. In front of you, you will see that overall, North saw a 32.64% decrease in our failure data when comparing semester 1 to semester 2 F data. The data in front of you is also broken down by grade level. What is important to notice when looking at the grade level specific data is, if you look at the 9th grade data, that is where we saw one of the largest decreases. So Rachel just shared with you the 4 most failed courses and mentioned that they are your 9th grade courses. We were pleased to see that we had the largest decrease in failures specifically in our 9th grade. So you can see our decreased ranges from anywhere between 6 and 11% at each of the different grade levels. Some of the things that we did specifically at North was, where we put a credit recovery option in place. We had that set and ready to go by March 1st of 2021. And any student who failed a semester 1 course, is still in effect, our individual teachers worked with the specific learning targets that our students needed to recover. So most of that work took place during the second half of lunch with our students. So we had multiple forms of communication that was shared with the students, the families, via letters, via phone calls. We had teachers physically making phone calls home to each and every child who failed a course. But before we did that, we actually created a tiered system for determining the prioritizing which courses needed to be recovered first. So we prioritized math because of the new math vision that's going into play. In the fall, we knew our classes would look differently. So we knew that the priority was getting our students to recover their math credits. So in a sense, that was our tier 1, if you will. We then moved into looking at students who needed the English recovery because of the 4 credits that are required for graduation. We knew that if we didn't recover that English credit, that we would continue to see that gap, and we knew we would continue to see concerning graduation rates if we did not recover those English credits right away. Then we moved into science, social studies, PE, health, and then we called that tier 2B. And then our tier 3 were all of our elective credits. So we obviously had some students who failed multiple courses, so that's why it was important for us to have a tiered system. We knew that if we were not seeing success in one academic area, we met each and every week. Our student service team, our administration team, we met every Thursday to review student grades. Constant communication with our teachers every week, looking at the progress of our students. If one area was not successful for that student, we tried recovering in another area with that student. So we also tried to remove any barriers that the students may have shared with us. So for example, because students were recovering their credits in the second half of lunch, we heard different reasons why students weren't showing up for credit recovery. It was, I couldn't get through the lunch line fast enough, or this or that. So we even instituted a lunch pass policy. We gave students lunch passes to go get their lunch first in line. Administrators, counselors, we were finding students in the field house and giving them gentle reminders of where they needed to be in case they forgot where they needed to be. And so really it was just an all hands on deck approach with our students. And I really believe just the full team effort resulted in some really positive results. So we know that we have more work to do, but we're pleased with the outcome of credit recovery, which was something that we had not done previously. So. Oh, thank you. Okay, looking a little more specifically at our subgroup data, you can see the decrease in percentage of Fs. If you're looking at our students who have an IEP with an individualized education plan, are white students, Hispanic students, and Black students. So. Do you want to talk a little bit about the 100%?
Sure.
Okay.
So what you'll see on each of the slides when it comes to our subgroup data is what we're looking for is on the column to the left where it says the percentage of F. So that's the total number of students who would identify, for example, in that first column, students with an IEP, 24% of the total Fs that were administered at North were administered to students who have an IEP. That compares then to out of the total student body at North, 12% of the student body has an IEP. The areas that are highlighted in yellow are the areas in which there was a decrease in that subgroup's F data from semester 1 to semester 2. So at North, their Black students decreased the total number of Fs that were accrued from semester 1 to semester 2. And so something that we look for here is what we call proportionality. So if, for example, the total number of students with an IEP make up 12% of the total population at North, we would ideally like to see them not, exceed 12% of the total number of Fs. We typically look for proportionality. And when there's significant disproportionality, that helps us to then determine, do we need to inform our action planning in a different way? Do we need to look at that group of students and plan differently around their needs?
So based on that data during this period of time, did you have to change course with the different groups? And what did you have to do?
We did change course. I wouldn't say that we changed course for any specific subgroups per se, but in looking, for example, at our Hispanic students, there was greater communication between our regular education teachers and our EL teachers, or our co-taught regular education teachers who taught side by side with our EL teachers in looking at the specific needs of those students. I wouldn't say that that's something different per se than what we do in any other regular year. We were just more conscientious of the data and what it was showing. The same is true with our students with an IEP. We are case managers at North. We have 10 special education teachers. We have a very large special education population within our high school. And so our case managers were also a greater part of our SST meetings with our administrators and our counselors on Thursdays. So they were more part of those conversations each week in looking at, for example, a student with an IEP who may have failed English 9. It was looking at, okay, what are those learning targets? Are those learning targets going to repeat second semester? Rather than having to go back to the first semester learning target, can we integrate that learning target into the learning that is taking place within second semester? So I would say just greater communication between all of the adults in the building and making sure that each of the individualized plans for all of our students were targeted for their specific needs. So to get back to your question, even our regular education students, white, Hispanic, Black, without individualized education plans, they had individualized education plans because everybody's route to recovery was different.
Sure. And I would imagine, and that's where the word individual comes in, right? And actually, I think this is a great way to go. The plans varied quite a bit, as you just said, based upon the student. Now, Steve will kill me if I rep my iPad here. I'm Italian. So implementing individual plans for each student, I think, was a fantastic way to go. Did the other high schools do the same thing? Okay.
Go ahead, Rachel. I'm going to talk a little bit. I'm going to present around the other high schools, and I'll share. They did similar things. Yes, they all had credit recovery efforts. They did not all see the same success that North saw. North, by far, saw the greatest success within their credit recovery efforts, but all of the buildings did implement credit recovery in some shape.
So I don't know if Jody was the assistant superintendent when I had said this a number of years ago, but I think ideally we would have individualized learning plans for every student all the time. Now, I know that might be impossible, right? But they can be effective. That's the point. So do you think that some of these practices may be carried forward into this next year?
Yeah, I think this is a great transition into South because that is South's next step based on their data. So would you mind flipping? So South, as you can see, only ended up seeing a 1% decrease. So not nearly the type of decrease that they would have liked to have seen. And as you look at their data in particular, you'll notice that they saw increases again in their F data in their 9th and 10th graders in particular from semester 1 to semester 2. And so when their building leadership team as well as their teacher PLC teams met over the course of the spring and then into the summer, their building goal that they have set for next year that I'm sure Mr. Kitzler will be excited to come and present continued updates around is specific to every 9th and 10th grader will have a individualized plan where they will be goal setting around where they want to be with their grade point average, how they will intend to get there, and then they will be meeting with, they call them their advisory teachers, so each one of our students has an advisory period where they will be receiving mentorship around how to meet that goal. So rather than setting, every student's going to raise his or her, GPA by this much, or every student's going to, they're really personalizing it to the individual student for exactly the reasons that you just referenced. It is personal what each child needs. In talking with Mr. Kitzler about this data, one of the things that he shared is that their student services team at South explained that many of the students at South were really facing a lot during the pandemic, and that mental and emotional trauma, they think, played a significant role on students' ability to access their learning. And so that may or may not have contributed to some of the results that they saw. But they do have an action plan around that is very specific to individualized plan next year for each student so that they can keep better track of just making sure that kids are not slipping through the cracks and they can.
Thank you.
Do you have a sense for how many of the Fs were due to just full absenteeism or missing students? Like, was there an attempt or there was just no engagement?
So we do have referral data that we keep for absenteeism. We do keep truancy data. I think I would ask Kristen to maybe give you North specific information. I don't have that on South and West, but I'm sure Kristen can speak to that on North's behalf.
Thank you. I do not have the specific percentages, but I will tell you that an overwhelming majority of these Fs did come from our students who we had quoted as NVP or non-virtual participation in our gradebook. So we did see correlation between our failure rates and our students who were not attending face-to-face. Yes, there were certainly failures for our students who were attending back at school, but a vast majority of these failures did come from our students who remain virtual and were not participating. One of the things that we did each week during our admin and student service meetings is we broke our data down in looking at our students who are face-to-face versus our students who are not in the building. And a great amount of our focus was spent on those students who are not attending.
Follow-up question. What was the approach taken then for the some 20% of seniors who had Fs?
Okay. Again, we looked at prioritization. We asked our teachers every 2 weeks to fill out a contingency report, a senior contingency report, identifying whether or not the senior needed the course that was in process of failing, or if it was a course from semester 1 that was failed. We determined whether or not they needed that course for graduation. So again, we were really prioritizing what credit need to be recovered first. If we could recover multiple credits at one time. If students had release periods, study halls, we had conversations with families. We were revoking those courses to get those students back into the classroom with teachers, working with teachers who may have had prep periods. So maybe it wasn't their actual English 12 teacher, but they could meet with an English teacher that hour. So it was very specific in targeting who was on path for graduation and who was not. And the way we really kept tight reins on that was by asking our teachers every 2 weeks to fill out a contingency report. That report was then sent to counselors. It was also mailed home to families, and then parents also received phone calls home letting families know, like, okay, if your child does not have the 24 required credits to walk across the stage, the child's going to have to do summer school. Here are some of the concerns with summer school. So it was really just being very clear with what the options were. So again, coming back just to that individualized need for each child.
Sounds like we didn't graduate anyone without 24 credits.
And that was just what Kristen just described in terms of the prioritization of the seniors. That was also consistent across all of our sites, as well as into summer school. We prioritized our seniors who needed classes for graduation. So in terms of South then, subgroup data, so as you can see, their students with an IEP percentage of Fs were very proportionate. Their Hispanic students did see an overall decrease in the number of Fs from semester 1 to semester 2. And so that was a great celebration. In moving on to West, West saw an overall 15.25% overall decrease in their percentage of students who failed one or more courses. If you look, their seniors actually had the most significant decrease. And so again, across the board, you know, Kristen was talking about North, they saw their freshmen who had the most significant decrease. And so our principals between first semester and second semester met on a biweekly basis for an hour to talk specifically about action planning around this data. They were an incredibly collaborative group, and so it's not like any one of them was doing anything differently. It really did come down to very individual scenarios, how those students, families, teachers, right, interacted around those scenarios. But the action plans themselves were quite similar across all three sites. Looking at West subgroup data then, they did see an overall decrease in both their white students as well as their black students. Their students with an IEP, we can see that there is some disproportionality as well as their Hispanic students. So Eachieve, like I referenced earlier in the presentation, did see the most significant increase. It was our only high school that did see an increase in the percentage of Fs from semester 1 into semester 2. And so in looking at what perhaps accounted for that increase, there's a few variables. So one is, right, Eachieve was our school that saw the most significant shift in terms of like how they do business from pre-pandemic to pandemic. They had the largest influx of students and staff. Doing virtual school, becoming a virtual teacher, right? They had the largest influx of new teachers. They had significant transients of students going in and out. And so all of those factors combined, we think, impacted this data. But one of the biggest variables that we think accounted for this is that in a typical year, a student who is not thriving from right? The surrounding districts that Eachieve receives students, if they're not thriving in Eachieve's environment for whatever the reason, they are typically sent back to that home school. We didn't do that this year because of the pandemic. And so we continue to, develop plans, try and reach those kids, find ways to help them succeed. But in some cases, it just didn't work. And so knowing that there wasn't anywhere to send them back to, these families weren't comfortable putting them back in a face-to-face setting, Eachieve maintained their enrollment, but as a result, some of these students did not show up to school. And so I met with Jason Smith and Emily McHugh for quite some time to just dig into this data. As of course you can imagine, they're not happy about that. They continue to build plans around what we call universal instruction. So, this is a data storyline. When you see something like 38% of your students are failing one or more courses, that points to a problem in what we call the universal level. This isn't talking now about specialized instruction or tiered instruction. This is, we have to approach, how are we planning for all students? And so Eachieve is continuing to develop a targeted school improvement plan in which they are looking at planning for all students. They are partnering with Katie Novak, who is a world-renowned educational guru around planning for all students going into the following school year. And so just some really great work happening there to target this data. Go ahead.
Just a question, I guess, about Eachieve. But when I look at this data, semester 2 versus semester 2 last year, it looks like was actually better. So there seems to be a systemic problem that can't be explained by new teachers and new students and the pandemic. This seems to me, with the exception of 11th graders, everybody actually did the same or better than they have in previous years.
So keep in mind, though, the semester 2 of 1920 was still pandemic, and they did see some shifts as well with the kids who were moving to that virtual school. Now, I'm not sure exactly what the enrollment trend was, but
I think before we draw conclusions about Eachieve, we should probably look holistically at that data, because this to me doesn't explain or
most certainly. And I think the conclusion, yes, most certainly. And I think if you look at that semester 2 data from 1920, again, if even looking at the 48% or the 38%, those would still point to those are really large numbers that would point to just universal problems in the instructional delivery. And we have to change how we're doing business there to help more students succeed. So.
Mr. Como.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Would you please remind me of the number of students pre-pandemic we had attending Eachieve, and then during this last year? I thought it doubled. Is that right? From 600 to 1,200 roughly? Is my brain remembering or not?
I'm looking around the room because I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. I could most certainly get them for you.
Roughly?
Kindergarten through 12th grade program at Eachieve would have about 1,000 students in an average year. And this year at our high, I think we were up to 2,800. And I think it's settled down to about 2,000, 2,100 kids as the year went forward.
And do you remember how many teachers we had to hire? 2 additional teachers? Okay. Yeah, I bring it up just to try and put it in perspective. This wasn't just we increased the student population by 10% and hired 2 teachers. This was a massive change for us, and we're going to find out how much of it is permanent and how much isn't probably this year. How much is pandemic driven versus non-pandemic driven. So anyways, I just wanted some perspective on that.
In terms of their subgroup data, then again, they saw a small, but a decrease nonetheless in their Black students, and then overall they maintain close to proportionate in their other subgroups. So in looking then overall, if you want to click, in terms of what we're doing for the following year based on this data. So first and foremost, we are going to continue to engage in the curricular revision process around social studies, ELA, and math to ensure the delivery of a guaranteed and viable curriculum. We know that it is of utmost importance to ensure that we are, again, setting rigorous standards, aligning those standards then to instruction that meets all students' needs, that allows all students to strive within our curriculum. And so that is the work that is ahead of us. We will continue to come in front of the board and update you around the progress of that work. We have an incredibly robust summer school experience, over 200 students currently enrolled in our credit recovery through summer school. We have really exciting Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. We were not able to secure staffing to run that through summer school. And really proud of our algebra teachers at Waukesha North, at Waukesha South, and Waukesha West when they found out that that wasn't going to run through summer school and found out that we did have both seniors as well as a number of students who had signed up to take it. They stepped up to create individualized plans and work with those students one-on-one throughout the summer to recover those credits. Kristen Higgins has three teachers at Waukesha North who are helping to spearhead that effort. And so while they couldn't commit to the summer school, the consistent summer school schedule, they are meeting with those students throughout the summer on their own schedule to help them to recover the credit so that they can graduate high school. And just, again, a huge testament to the dedication of our teachers and just making that work for students as well. We are going to maintain into next year a just-in-time support system for students. And so we don't have the logistics completely worked out on what that is going to look like. As Kristen was referencing, currently we are sticking with our one lunch period. So we do have a longer lunchtime for students where they will be able to access a just-in-time support, extra help when they need it, meeting with teachers. But right now that does butt up then against waiting in lunch lines and being with their friends. And so we're trying to look at creative options that might give them some choice as to if you miss lunch today, or not miss lunch, but right, if you give up part of your lunch today, what does that look like then maybe for the following week? You come in the morning. We're exploring what that's going to be. We have our freshman ignition, or back when I was in school, it was called orientation. And this year at all three of our sites, based on, again, our freshman data and seeing just an increase in the number of students who are not having success with some of our freshman courses, we're placing an emphasis on goal setting, on organization. So I don't know if any of you have ninth graders, but sometimes they struggle with organizing the number of classes that they're taking. And so working with them on organization, advocacy, and then, of course, relationships. Very, very excited that for the first time since I've been in the district, all of our high schools, except for Eachieve, who's going to continue around their goal with universal instruction, they will be working around having a common building goal around literacy. And what this is going to allow us to do is have just a very clear target for collaboration, for allocation of resources, for calibration. It's going to be really exciting. They're all going to be engaging in professional learning together. And we know that when our teachers and our administrators are on the same page with what good instruction looks like, that transfers into quality instruction for kids, which transfers to increases in student achievement. And then lastly, we're going to be implementing what's called Character Strong, and that's a social and emotional curriculum that is designed to support the mental health and social and emotional well-being of all students. I think it's worth mentioning that some of our students are still dealing with the aftermath of the pandemic. They have lost loved ones. They are still dealing with the aftermath of parents who have lost their jobs and have not recovered. And the emotional instability that has taken its toll on these kids is not short-lived. And so supporting their well-being and ensuring that they have an avenue to deal with that ensures that they can feel safe in school, which we know, again, promotes their access to that learning. So those are some of our plans that we have in place going into next year to continue to target improvements in this data that we have presented.
Mr. Roddy?
Can student get a D? We still give Ds? My kids are probably lucky that I don't know the answer to this question.
Yes.
You get a D.
Yes, you can get a D.
And that's passing? How do you guys feel about?
We're not thrilled with Ds.
Yeah. I'm assuming that the category of Ds increased as well. We have some kids that barely passed, and that will be addressed in some of the catch up. They're not required to then take the summer classes to catch up. Just looking at the data across the schools, I mean, the 11th grade really stands out to me, and I think making sure that these kids are ready for graduation is really important because, I mean, even West, which had a pretty significant recovery even after the first round of Fs, I'll say, the 11th grade really stands out. So is there a specific plan around 11th graders? Sure. Incoming seniors, I should say.
So at all of our high schools, each and every junior has what's called a junior conference, where the counselor who has worked with that junior meets individually with each and every family to discuss their plans, the schedule for their senior year, as well as their plans for beyond high school. Oftentimes within those junior conferences, there is a discussion about what current grades are like, where the struggles are. So to also just build upon your observation, we have found that junior year seems to be the most challenging for many of our students. It's the year where our students take the most AP courses, those students who are pushing themselves and going that route. They have their AP courses. Oftentimes, that's the first real ACT, the one that students will say counts. And that's oftentimes the students are feeling pressured to, okay, which college am I going to apply to going into my senior year? So we do find that that's the most challenging academic year for our students. But again, really the junior conference is something that opens that line of communication between the school, the students, and the families. And I also, in going back to your comment about the Ds, we certainly are not happy with Ds either. Our conversation with our staff is don't let it get to that point. So we shouldn't just be calling students in for just in time. We call it JIT. Don't call students in for JIT. Don't wait until they're failing to get them in. So even if a student was at an A and you're seeing a quick drop into the B or C level, get them in, find out what's going on, act quickly. So we do our best to be proactive and avoid getting to that point.
One quick follow-up to that. Did the kids with Ds have a chance to do the credit recovery as well, or was it just Fs?
So it was the credit recovery is designed for students who failed, but to Kristen's point, any student throughout the course of a semester does have an opportunity to show proficiency around a learning target throughout that semester, and they would work with his or her teacher around doing that. We typically cut that off at the semester mark. So throughout the course of that semester, if that student says, I would like to retake, submit, right, they have that opportunity to do that.
Ms. Roddy.
Yes, thank you. Hi, thank you, ladies, for your presentation. Can you give a snapshot of what the curricular revision process looks like, please?
Yes. So we start by looking at what we call like the current state of the state. So what do we currently do within our curriculum? So we look at our current scope and sequence, the current standards that might exist. We look at best practices around that, whatever the curricular content area is. We then, and by we, I should have stated this, we form a curricular visioning team. That's the first phase. So we form a team composed of teachers within that content area, as well as building administrators and then district administrators. And so we look at data, our student data around that content area, and then compiling all that information, we form what we call a visioning statement. So we look at what are the most important things that we want students to know and be able to do within this content area. How does that align to the best practices in research around that content area that are in effect, right now, 2021? How does that align to the newest version of whatever the standards are? And then how does that align to our student data? Once that vision is complete, we then meet with our curricular teams, which are teams of teachers who teach the specific courses then within that curricular area. So I'm going to use English, for example, because that's one of the curricular revisions we're underway right now. We would meet then with our English 9 team, and they would then take that visioning statement and look at what do we want now that English 9 course to be. So we would then design common assessments, rubrics, again, aligned to the standards, aligned to the outcomes. And then from there, we would develop what we call a plan for implementation. So once we have what we want it to be, what we've built aligned to standards, outcomes, et cetera, how are we going to implement it and professionally develop all of the stakeholders who need to know how to do this? And then the last phase is our monitoring phase. So once we then go to implement it, how are we monitoring it to make sure that it's having the impact that we want? Throughout that whole process, phase 1 to phase 4, we are updating what we call our district curriculum council. So that team is composed of both community stakeholders, parent stakeholders, as well as district stakeholders, as well as our board. To make sure that we have a variety of just stakeholder groups who understand what the curriculum work is and have voice into that process. That's like a snapshot version off the top of my head.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Herman.
Yep. Questions?
Rachel, could you or Kristen tell me if there is any type of transitional work from middle school to high school? Something tells me the 8th grade teachers in our district could probably identify some of the kids, at least as freshman year, that are struggling, having difficulty, or maybe some of our 5th grade teachers could identify those that are struggling. Could you tell me if there has been any work in that area, or if future plans would indicate that there would be?
Yes, so we have actually just finalized a data system that will support understanding the storyline of our most striving students from 5th grade to 6th grade, so that all of our 6th grade teachers as well as administrators will have, in essence, what we call a profile of that student to know what interventions that student has received, what the storyline of that child's success, again, areas of improvement are. And that was finalized right around April, and we are now building that same tool for 8th grade to 9th grade. In addition, we do have, and Kristen can probably talk about that, the plans for 8th grade to 9th grade transition.
So each spring, our student service department goes over specifically to Butler, because that is our main feeder into the North High School. And they meet individually with the counselors at Butler Middle School, as well as a core content teacher rep, to discuss the specific needs of individual students. So we're not just looking at students who have received a specific intervention. There's conversations. So we're looking beyond standardized test data. We're looking beyond map data. We're looking beyond grades. It's conversations, and it's not just students who are struggling, but it's students who are excelling. So looking at our 8th graders who have potentially taken biology as an 8th grader and are coming in and taking a sophomore class as a freshman. So we've really learned to look beyond just looking at what we see on paper, but talking about students and getting to know more about what it is that they need to succeed. So those individual conversations have been very helpful, and we're finding that we are able to properly place students coming into their freshman year on day one versus having a child in a class for a week, maybe 2 weeks, and realizing it's not the appropriate placement. So I think we actually had those conversations, I want to say in early January. So we were able to make those placements when scheduling came around at the end of January, beginning of February.
Very good.
So we did that. We started doing that last spring, before COVID hit, and we found a lot less changes were needed in the fall. And obviously, when you switch students 2 weeks into the school year, they have to learn a whole new, way with a new teacher, and that just does not set them up for success at the beginning of the school year. So we're going to continue with those conversations. And again, more than just the struggling student, but also for the excelling student as well.
And then do either of you see AVID as assisting in the area that we're talking about tonight? And if so, how?
Absolutely. I think with having AVID at the elementary level, the middle school level, and at the high school level, students are coming into the secondary schools knowing more about those organizational pieces. We're able to dive in, our teachers are able to dive in more quickly, rather than having to spend the amount of time in talking about binders and focus notes. I think what is most important to note is that at the secondary level specifically, we're not just looking at AVID elective students. We're finding that the AVID strategies are proving to be useful across all content areas, across all grade levels. So again, the earlier we can start our students in AVID, the earlier we can see those school-wide practices happening throughout the system, the more we're going to reap the benefits as students continue to come up the ranks.
I would add this, and I think it's something that I experienced as a principal at Lowell in implementing AVID, and something that I've seen as I've worked with different buildings. Buildings who can implement AVID with fidelity turn AVID into an identity for their learners. And when you as a learner view yourself as an AVID student, to Kristen's point, not as being part of the AVID elective, but I'm in an AVID school, that AVID identity is associated with a high standard, with college and career readiness, with I've got stuff to do. And that mentality equates to perseverance, dedication, right? And I think that you see that in places where AVID has lived for quite some time, and where AVID is being launched again with fidelity to that model. And so I think, continued efforts around AVID will most certainly impact this data storyline, as well as just the trajectory of so many of our kids' lives.
We have a lot of citizens in our audience this evening that might not know a lot about AVID. Would you be able to just give us a brief description of what that program entails and how far we've come in the district with the implementation?
Sure. AVID stands for Advancement via Individual Determination, and it is a system that is designed to promote all learners to, I would describe it as having any door for which they choose to open, have open for them. We are in, I'm looking at Jody, year 10. So Waukesha South has had AVID the longest in our district. They're going into year 10. We launched it at our elementary sites 5 years ago, Lowell and Higher being the two pilots. It has since launched now in up to 10 elementaries. It exists in all of our middle schools and all of our high schools. There's what's called AVID School-Wide, which is a set of instructional practices that permeate the entire school. Regardless of what you teach, there are practices and beliefs that that impact all students and all teachers. At the secondary level, so in our middle schools and high schools, there's also what's called the AVID elective. And that is a pillar of the AVID system. It is something that students apply to get into. There's an application, there is a screening process, an interview process, and these are students who need some additional guidance and support to help them to accelerate through school, and they're given that through that AVID elective. I think if we were to look at pre-AVID, some of our data, when we look at number of students who are taking AP courses, number of students who have seen success in AP courses, who is taking our AP courses, our AVID system has just proven again to be invaluable for some of our students. We were fortunate enough 3 years ago, but don't quote me on that because the pandemic has thrown my timeline off. So it might be 4 years ago to have a Waukesha South student be the keynote speaker at the AVID National Institute. Grayson Cooley was his name. If you get a chance to look it up, his keynote address, probably it's a 3-minute speech that describes AVID in a way that I'm not doing justice to, but that is, it's amazing. Putting me on the spot here tonight, Mr. Deeds. Curriculum process and AVID, yeah.
Briefly mention what South is celebrating.
And Waukesha South, yes, has received this year AVID's, I would say, highest honor. They were awarded the national. They are awarded the recognition of being a national school of demonstration, which there are only 3 other schools in Wisconsin that have received that level of distinction. And so what that means is that their school has demonstrated the practices and the system of AVID at such a level of implementation that they are now considered a model for other schools within the nation. And so we are super proud of that work.
And if I could add,
and North is on their way.
I wasn't going to say that. In going back to our presentation, the second to last bullet mentions the continued collaboration among all of our high schools around common building goals. The common building goals is built around BCOR, which is an acronym for writing, inquiry, collaboration, organization, and reading. And no matter what classroom you walk into within all 3 of our buildings, you will see writing, inquiry, collaboration, organization, reading taking place within every class period. And so that is one part of the AVID system. So when we talk about school-wide, we're not looking at just the students who are part of the AVID elective. All students are a part of the AVID school-wide. So and that's something that all of our schools are focusing on, will continue to focus on this year.
Very good job. Anything else from anybody this evening? Questions, comments? Should be very proud of yourself for answering all those questions.
I've got great support.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great job. Is that something that we'll continue to hear about in the future?
Which part?
All of it? Yes.
The beginning,
yes.
At least the beginning.
Absolutely, yes. We definitely plan on updating you on that. Yes. Yes.
South has how many elective classes now? 9?
9.
9.
Yes.
I think each year North and West are also growing. We're in year 4, and we continue to add new elective classes each year. So I think this year we're up to 6 elective classes, and we're in year 4 or 5. We started with 1. So.
I'm going to ask one more question, Rachel.
Yeah, no. And
are there any AP courses being considered or being looked at for the upcoming school year that would be implemented the following year, or where are we with that?
So we we don't have any new AP courses on the books for this upcoming school year, but we are looking at AP seminar. So we currently have AP research we have AP seminar. We're looking at adding AP research. And it's similar to the AP Capstone project. We've been talking about that for a few years now. And so as part of our English curricular revision, we'll be looking at that. for the 22-23 school year.
Very good. Anyone else? Thank you very much for your time and effort. Your presentation was, I thought, excellent, and just the answers to all of our questions made sense. And thank you for explaining Avid to the members of our community that were here tonight. I appreciate them also knowing, I think we use a lot of acronyms in education, and sometimes just that additional amount of information or explanation, I think, benefits a lot of people. So
Absolutely.
I appreciate your time and effort tonight. Thank you so much. Great job.
Appreciate your support, so thank you.
This evening, under discussion information items, we have our equity and culturally relevant teaching strategies presented by Jody Landish, our Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning. We also have our board member, Mr. Zenobia, that's going to sit in on the presentation portion of this discussion information item. As board members, not all of us are on the various committees, but we are able to attend committees that we're not assigned to and be involved in the participation portion of a particular item. So welcome, Mr. Zenobia, and we'll turn it over to Ms. Landish at this time. Thank you.
All right. Well, actually, Mr. Dietz, I'm going to just open this up for Ms. Landish, and this will be very similar to what we did at the workshop last
Welcome,
week.
Dr. Siebert.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Dietz. And so this is at the request of Mr. Zenobia, so thank you for being here. He requested this at the June board meeting, and the topic, as you said, is equity and culturally responsive teaching practices. We have Ms. Landish and Dr. Cook, who will lead the presentation, and then we're also joined by Tiara Rogers, who is our new, come on up, Tiara, sure, our new Director of Equity and Educator Effectiveness. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Landish, and I'll run the slideshow.
All right, thank you, Dr. Siebert. As he mentioned, this won't be new information since this is a duplication of the presentation we did last week at the board session. Just a few updates of feedback from that board work session that we're implementing today. So the first slide really goes into a high-level overview of what has grounded our work in the school district for more than 15 years. And this has been our mission and vision and our commitment to being a 21st century learning organization dedicated to equity, innovation, excellence, and collaboration. So these are the pillars that were adopted by the board, as mentioned, about 15 or 17 years ago. These are you'll see this poster outside of the boardroom and in all of our schools that grounds the work and decision-making that we do as a system. The next slide is now in a draft format. This, when I presented it last week, was what I wanted to show were our equity belief and equity embrace statements that were currently our forward-facing documents on our website. So since our board work session, we did get some feedback that we should take down these statements off of the website until this Teaching and Learning Committee had the opportunity to look at the statements. And so the process will be that this will be the first sort of information around the belief and embrace statement. So I'll talk a little bit more about this because I think our plan is then what we always try to do is bring something in front of the board 2 times, at least before we ask the board to take action on something. So we would look potentially at having this as the first introduction to this today, perhaps coming in August as a discussion item, and then again looking perhaps in September, and I look at my new director will probably team on this, right? Perhaps looking in September to have action then and board approval. So just wanted to give a little background of how these statements came to be. This was the first year that we had a district equity leadership team. And this team included about 29 individuals, teachers, social workers, administrators, some alumni, representatives. And so really, this team met 9 times this year. So looking back, because I kind of wanted to see a timeline of how long it took us to kind of co-construct and collaborate on these documents. The goal was really to find common language around this work, including like just a common definition of what equity means, and come up with a common mission and vision upon which we could ground our work. So starting in September of 2020 is when this team first met, and from September until really January of 2021 is when this draft was finalized. So you can see the belief statement talks about the school district of Waukesha believing in a positive and welcoming school culture that is deeply rooted in equity, which is our foundation. It talks about our definition of equity as providing all students with the necessary tools and access to learning opportunities, supporting them to reach their full potential. We believe all students are entitled to the resources and systems of supports needed to assist them to achieve at their highest levels. Failure is not an option because of district leaders, school leaders, teachers, and community stakeholders who work relentlessly serving all students and families, regardless of race, religion, socioeconomic status, and ability. We are committed to serve everyone that has partnered with our district. So this, again, was work constructed from that team, and a lot of voices around this belief statement, as well as a similar embrace statement that really talks about how we embrace diversity as an organization, how we want to continue to build capacity in all educators to become more culturally aware and sensitive to the growing population of diverse learners that we serve. We strive for all students to become college and career ready, as mentioned in our mission, before leaving our district. We are committed to providing a rigorous and viable curriculum that holds all students accountable for achieving at their highest levels, despite disparities of family resources, student abilities, and cultures. Again, following our vision, equity in education is the foundation of this district, along with partnering with families and community stakeholders to meet the academic and social emotional needs of all students. So that is, again, in draft form, and we'll be looking to bring that back to you over the coming months to discuss and perhaps take further action on. Thank you. Again, as requested, some of our equity programs that are currently in place in our system, we currently have these 3 highlighted areas on our website. The first top 2 pictures represent our dual language programs in our district that have a pillar around culturally and linguistically relevant teaching strategies. We have had our dual language program in the school district of Waukesha starting in the fall of 2001, really, when Banting Elementary, Mr. Como, you know that, became a district site for our Spanish bilingual expansion program. So this has been a proud pillar of our community and our district for quite some time. And Mrs. Herman and Mrs. Higgins set us up well for this with the lower right quadrant in AVID and our partnership with AVID in our school district. And then most recently, one of our Black student unions was created from feedback from our students at the high school level. And so we do now, last year was the first year that, is that right? Our first year that our Black student unions we're organized both from South, West, and North High School. So these are kind of the programs, again, that we have highlighted on our website. One, again, in our partnership with AVID, we started to bring what is called an AVID strand, which is a professional learning component of AVID, into our school district in 2018. Was one of the learning strand for teachers titled Culturally Relevant Teaching. And so when you look in sort of like the program guide for professional learning for staff, this is the strand that AVID lists in their professional development materials. So again, this strand focuses on how cultural, ethnic, and linguistic diversity of our students brings value and assets to our classrooms and communities. Educators come together to explore strategies and lessons that help empower students through examination, validation, and celebration of their own and others' cultures. Engage with colleagues in community-building activities and critical conversations around race, gender, class, sexual orientation, and other culturally relevant topics, all designed to equip participants with practical strategies for empowering students in our classrooms, schools, and districts. This strand provides a forum for everyone to collaborate around equity and culturally relevant practice in support of our teachers. So we will host this AVID strand in the district, and we're actually proud that this year it is going to be free for us at no cost, also because of Amanda Wagner's expertise and the way she has sort of risen in her leadership with AVID as well. But we have 30 staff members signed up currently for this strand that will be taught in August. We have had a total of 61 staff members take this course so far. This, again, is not a video here, but I would encourage anyone to just Google Patrick Briggs, and the video is called A Tale of $2. This, again, with our AVID partnership, he was one of our keynote speakers in 2016. Again, he is an AVID leader and partner, and so we brought him in to talk about AVID and the value of meeting the needs of all of our learners. And really the video talks about the focus on high expectations for all and making sure we have opportunities for all. And so I don't know if many of you were at West when we held this session as well, but again, this just shows that this hasn't been sort of a one-year event in Waukesha, and that the work of equity has been part of our pillars of practice for a very long time.
So another area that we tend to in the district is obviously we get rules, regulations from the state and federal government. And the recent, in 2015, implemented in 2016, the Every Student Succeeds Act, formerly the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, was reauthorized. And that put the states in a position where they had to develop plans to address among other things, equity in our schools. How are students performing? How are subgroups of students performing? How are they doing on state assessments? How are they doing when it comes down to discipline, graduation rates, growth, and such? And this is what generates our annual school report cards, where you will get the ranking from the DPI as to how the individual school is doing and how the district is doing as a whole. Along the same time, and for a decade or so, our district has been designated as disproportionate for Black students in special education. And that might be in any one of the disability areas, such as intellectual disability, emotional behavioral disability, other health impairments, specific learning disability. And what that means is that... So correct. Black children who are also being identified in special education in one of those areas. And also black children who are being disciplined disproportionate to their white peers. So we have had that designation for a number of years, and we were disproportionate. It was, I guess, the first level disproportionate. We had reached the level 3 school years ago of being significantly disproportionate. And as a result of that, we were looking at, what was the root cause analysis of it, and we found that students who were black in our district were accounting for a substantial number of the office discipline referrals. And so as a district, we began a district-wide discipline team. That discipline team was about 65 staff members. That included teachers, student services staff members, principals, district administrators, all the way up to Dr. Gray, who participated in our meetings over a 2-year period of time. If you could advance. As a result of that work, we began to dig into our why, and through questioning, table discussions, we identified that there was a gap in teacher skill and teacher knowledge of cultural differences between where they were coming from as predominantly white middle-class educators and the black students who were sitting in their classrooms. And so we began our work, we continued our work, and we began to make the move around culturally responsive classroom management and teaching with Dr. Holly, and then restorative justice training to help us deal with the discipline issues that we were facing in our schools. Yeah.
That previous slide. So for the 1920 school year, 1920 school year, what group received that in-service? Or could you just go through those and give us the groups that attended?
Jody, if you could jump into it. It was 1920, we used Dr. Holly to do a district-wide professional development with staff.
August Summer Institute.
And through our Summer Institute, yep. And
that's not all staff. That's the teachers that decide to go.
No, that is contracted.
Oh, that's at the beginning of the
days,
school year.
yes.
Yeah, okay.
So it's August dates. Yep. And then during the 21-22 school year, we used Dr. Holly to work with our administrators, so our principals, assistant principals, district office administrators, on culturally responsive practices.
Yep, so again, the 10,000 for the culturally responsive classroom management and focus, this would be his second year continuing the work in the August Institute, which is predominantly held out at West, to continue the work around specifically VAB, which stands for Validate, Affirm, Build, and Bridge. And so it's, again, helping teachers build their toolkit around classroom management procedures, and focusing on culture as it relates to having sort of a instructionally sound and safe classroom environment. The restorative justice training, also just to add, I know it wasn't asked about, but this was, again, I believe the work, some of this was the outcome of the team that Dr. Cook had mentioned. This is continuous training and professional development for to help repair relationships as a proactive approach to classroom management and discipline. So it involves having sort of a mediation or a restorative circle when there is repair done in an issue regarding discipline. The goal would be to bring in essence, the discipline matter with the child, perhaps the parent, counselor, teacher for sure, as part of a circle in order to help repair the damage done and move forward.
Thank you. And one of the findings of that committee was that punishment wasn't working. Punishment was not working when suspensions, expulsions were not working in addressing behavior in our system. Year after year, the kids were continuing to be suspended both in school and out of school. We were continuing to move kids forward for expulsion, and we were not seeing any turnaround in behavior. So we knew we needed to take additional steps to address behavior in our system.
And do you think you've seen improvement since the training?
We have seen improvements through the social and emotional learning. Mr. Pinion presented on our mental health and that continuum a couple months ago. That has been a big layer of this. The restorative practices has also helped with our discipline. We have noted that in office discipline referrals. There's a little bit of an asterisk next to what last school year would look like because we were this past school year, because we were virtual for so much, we just had fewer kids in the building. We had fewer office discipline referrals. And then the year before that, those numbers were a little bit askew because the March through June timeline, we were virtual and you weren't seeing office discipline referrals at that time. But we did start to see a downward trend from, I believe it was the 17-18 into the 18-19 school year. 19-20 was obviously disrupted.
So the cost of the in-service comes from the federal grant.
Correct. We use our title grant as well as our IDEA grant. As a result of that significant disproportionality, we have had to budget 15% of our flow-through budget, which comes in somewhere between $400,000 and $420,000 ish of funds to address pre-referrals. So what happens before the special ed referral, pre-referral strategies in our system. So we've used that money in the past to fund our director of equity. We have used that to fund deans of students. We've provided professional development in staff and how to differentiate instruction, how to address culturally responsive practices. A couple slides ago, you saw Patrick Briggs's picture up there. That money funded that opportunity as well.
And Dr. Cook, is that something that's, when you develop a plan like this, is that something that has to be approved by the Department of Public Instruction?
Correct. It's part of your budget approval from the DPI.
Okay. And what happens if you ignored that?
You wouldn't get your IDEA flow-through budget allocated to you. Just somewhere just shy of $3 million. So it's substantial money.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have a question just about who is delivering the culture consulting and the restorative justice training? Is that an organization or an individual?
So Dr. Holly is part of the culturally, I don't know the name of the organization off the top of my head. Tiara, can you help me with that name?
CCTRL?
Yes, CCTRL is the name of that organization. That is not the same as the restorative justice training, which is an LLC. I don't remember the name in front of me, but I can get you that. Those are separate companies.
So if I look at 2021, the culture consulting, the both lines were conducted by Dr. Holly?
Right. The teacher training in conjunction with CISA 1 was sponsored by our CISA, but he was involved with it. He also partnered with our CISA. And so that's how we got into that. That was just a few schools and teachers that had opted into wanting additional training through the CISA, and that's what was provided. Yes, correct. I'm sorry. That's what you're asking? Yes. The $6,000, as Dr. Cook mentioned, is what we paid to have him work with our administrators only this year.
Okay. And then the restorative justice training on all three of those lines is the same LLC?
Correct.
I'll have the name for you. It's the Center for Culturally Responsive Teaching and Learning.
Thank you.
That's Dr. Holly's organization.
Correct.
But not the organization that's doing the restorative justice training.
Then the last slide, and certainly we can continue to have dialogue, is around our equitable multi-level systems of support, our EMLSS work. We marked 2017 because that's really when the state of Wisconsin announced this huge achievement and disparity gap that we see in our state that we are not very proud of as a state. So you can see that it talks about the DPI saying that we have significant achievement gaps when it comes to our students of color and our students that are white or identify as white. our native as compared to our non-native English-speaking students, and students with disabilities as compared to students without disabilities. And so in 2010, the state had identified a way in which to help address these disparities, including bringing in this continuous improvement model upon which Waukesha has started its partnership with this Response to Intervention, or the RTI Center, in 2018. So, you know, for the past hour, we have talked a lot about what is involved in the circle around high quality instruction, about a continuum of supports for students and that strong universal level and how important that is. And you can see the state continues to outline its work that at the center, equity is what is a pillar involved in helping close this gap. And so this is, again, a partnership we have with them. We've been doing very intense work just the past 2 years with just looking overall at our systems of support from 4K to the time that they graduate successfully with us in helping be responsive to both, again, the universal level of instruction, as well as how we're intervening or accelerating with students, as we say, on the edges, right, or on the fringes of all the diverse learners that we have in our system. So that, again, is just a general overview of the equity programs and culturally responsive teaching practices that we have been working towards over the past, 10 or 15 years here in Waukesha. So,
questions, comments? Mr. Zenobia.
Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to jump in a little bit here tonight. I don't know if you can hear me or not. A few questions. Maybe if we could just back up more generally. In my meetings with the outgoing Director of Equity, Mr. Bakeman, and other people in administration have said that the purpose of equity was to close the achievement gap, which I am starting to understand. But what I had asked from Mr. Beekman and others was, I know you touched on it a little bit here, Dr. Cook, but what have we really seen that we can say is real data that these programs have closed the achievement gap? What is the return on investment today in any way? And I asked that question, if I could just go back for a second. There was a presentation a while back, this is just an example, so about closing the achievement gap at Whittier. And part of that achievement gap reduction program, what was chosen to do there was to make classes smaller. And I understand in addition to that, there's also going to be, I think, a new emphasis on reading. So that's one program that kind of, it conflicts a little bit with the overarching idea that equity is going to close the achievement gap as a general idea as it's been presented. Whereas in practice, in specific schools, we are using what I would call more fundamental things to close that gap. So is the equity program not for elementary? Is it focused in the middle school, high school? Is it something aimed at educators? I mean, I think the problem that I'm having and that many that I hear from are having is not understanding what direction this is going and how can we track it. Very long question. I don't know who wants to jump in and try to grab that one. But so trying to reconcile how what's actually being put into practice as far as what is being implemented versus statements on the website. I think trying to boil it down to what is actually taking place.
I'll take a grab at it to start with a few things I'm thinking, Mr. Zenobia. So maybe Dr. Siebert, if you could go back to slide 7. So I want to, I guess, make mention, first of all, I know we have some hard data around the restorative, the restorative practices training as it relates to our ODRs or our office discipline referrals. So we have very closely tied evidence to seeing decreases, especially I'm thinking of Butler Middle School. I think they gave us a presentation around that. That would show that because of implementing that program in particular, that they did see a decrease in office referrals. With that said, though, and you and I kind of talked about this, the main thing we all want to see is the student achievement indicators, right? And that's always the lagging data that we see. Simply because of the state assessments and at the time they come, and then we get the information in a lagging way rather than having lead us. But why I wanted to bring up this slide is because when we do have some of our ESSA identifications, and you make mention, well, does equity really need to be a part of how we're trying to solve things? This federal accountability, in essence, our schools have this status because their subgroups are not achieving at the typical rate of their counterparts. And so for the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 schools we currently have under federal accountability status, they have been identified because of students with disabilities and or Black students. And Whittier, for example, was one of those schools, as you mentioned, with their achievement gap reduction. So part of this, as Dr. Cook mentioned, is when they submit their proposal or their school improvement proposal to the federal accountability, that has to be approved by them, and they have to meet certain criteria with that. So that is one way. I know what you're asking for because, you and I just had a brief conversation. It's like we all want that silver bullet that's going to help all kids achieve. And we know with human capital and learners that it is so complex that we don't have a silver bullet. So we try to personalize learning for each child according to what they need. I think best instructional practices at the core is what we're always trying to build our teachers' toolkit for. As one of the teachers mentioned tonight, right? 8-10-year veteran is always learning and growing on how, if this kid is not learning, what do we do about it? And so it's just one approach. It's not the approach for all.
Okay. Another question I have, if we would go to the money that was spent the last 3 years. I understand that this $420,000 pool of money comes from the title grant and the IDEA grant. And Mr. Dietz made mention of we have a bucket of money to spend in order to get that money, or do we need to spend the 420 to get the 3 million? That's what I heard. I just want to understand that.
If you hit this designation that we've talked about, this significantly disproportionate, you're responsible for budgeting. You have to budget 15% towards pre-referral strategies. And when we have gone through and done a root cause analysis in our system, we're coming to the same conclusion time and time again. There is work to be done to serve better our Black students in our system. So through that, then we end up with the things that we have budgeted in IDEA. IDEA sits separate from what the title grants are, the ESSA grant, but that is one area that we must check that box and submit that budget as a result of a root cause analysis to what we identify as problems in our system before the DPI will approve us to get that portion of our grant.
Okay. So in doing that, that carefully outlined what they want to see? Is it, I guess what I'm getting at is, do we have some liberty in the things we do and select to reach this equity title to get this additional money and yet meet the needs that we're trying to meet? I mean, do we have latitude there?
So they do not prescribe to us that we focus on culturally responsive teaching. that's where our root cause analysis would lead us. They don't tell us that we need to have a director of equity. Those are the steps that we take to try to improve our system. What they do is they put those subgroup identifiers out there for us, and then they go further with that and say, these are areas where you are disproportionate in special education. And they'll say, well, you got to do something to improve that. And it's our responsibility then to respond to it. So they tell us that we have to do it. They don't tell us what to do along the way. We make that decision ourselves based off of our needs.
Good. That's great. Thank you.
Is there a measurement tool in there that if we don't reach a certain mark, they would penalize us? Or
so penalties, this ESSA that we've talked about replaced No Child Left Behind, which was passed, I think it was in 2001. No Child Left Behind had penalties in it. The goal was for all students to be proficient on your state assessment, and there were penalties that were associated with that. That went away. The penalty component of it went away. It's our responsibility to get to a status where we are no longer disproportionate. That's the designation. Getting back to the earlier question around closing achievement gaps, that's been our work for the longest time. If you go back, we started talking about equity in special education in 1997 with the IDEA being reauthorized at that particular time, where we were looking at taking students who were in segregated classrooms and doing an inclusive model of instruction where we were trying to provide the most instruction in the general ed classroom. It wasn't just a matter at that time of taking students with disabilities and shifting them into a general classroom. That was a component of it. But along with that was professional development for staff. It was allocation of resources. It was looking at the school day in order to try to address how we are instructing kids. So 25-ish years ago when IDEA was brought to us as federal legislation for students with disabilities, we had to shift our practices in school at that time.
And you said you do an internal review to identify areas that need to be addressed. Is there ever any sharing with other districts that would have similar marks against them that we might be able to learn from as well?
We are currently working with the DPI or the state RTI center on our ELMSS work, and it's through their guidance that we've made our movement. So if you see that up there, we're working with a state level person to help us facilitate our work, to bring those perspectives from other school districts and statewide areas to help improve our practice.
Good. Thank you. Mr. Como.
Sorry. Thank you, Jen. How important are the IDEA funds, and can you give us some perspective on how we spend them and why we spend them in the manner we do?
Yeah, for our school district, they're essential. They fund alternate placements for students with disabilities. They fund staffing. Our preschool entitlement grant helps support our early learners with disabilities. It does fund some of our equity work as it pertains to this portion of the CEIS dollars. So it's essential. Nearly $3 million of funding. I think in title it's about the same allocation for the district. So I think the federal government is getting us near $6 million in grant money to provide additional supports to students who have needs in our system.
Okay, appreciate it.
Yes. Dr. Piazza.
For Mrs. Landish, how is the AVID CRT different from the CCTRL CRT? They teach the same concepts, or?
I wouldn't say it's too different. I think the theme of knowing your students at the end of the day, most globally, is the message, right? And that permeates through our dual language, culturally and linguistically responsive teaching, as well as our AVID teaching strategies. I would say very similar. It's continuing to build the toolbox for a teacher so that they can use the best instructional methods to help reach all learners.
So if I understood what you said earlier, that the AVID CRT is part of the strand that some of our teachers will be able to attend. I think that's this month.
In August.
In August.
Yes.
And then the classroom management and focus on culture that's scheduled for 21-22, is that also part of the Summer Institute and would be contracted days for?
Yes.
So that would be required for everybody?
Yes. It's a sectional for them to attend, yes.
It's required?
That part is yes.
Just follow up. So a lot of the discussion tonight, especially about grade recovery, just reminds me, 2/3 of our students in the district are going to attend a high school that doesn't meet expectations, at least as far as the DPI report cards go. And I understand that some of that is related to some of the cultural and related issues that we have in the district. So I think maybe getting back to Mr. Zenobia's question earlier, like how do we fix what's going on in our high schools and know that the work that we're doing urgently is going to, I know it's not a silver bullet, but it seems to me like we kind of dance around this fact that 2/3 of our students will attend a high school that doesn't meet expectations. And if I look at some of the grade recovery, and I mean, I get it, this past year was a unique year, but the students who suffered the most were students of color. So how do these workshops change anything?
I don't know where to start in my thinking.
I'm not. Believe me, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. It's more rhetorical. Like how do we?
It is.
Where do we place our bets here?
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
If I could make one more comment, I know you want to respond,
Sure,
but
sure.
I feel like we're a lot of people in our community are really upset on multiple sides. You know, it should be a spectrum, right? We don't want to have these sides, but legitimately, because people interpret this differently based on their personal definition of equity or their personal understanding of what they think is needed to fix things. And I think that's where we're getting into some heated discussion because of the transparency and the mixed definitions. And so if we're going to put money on these trainings for our staff and say, this is required, it's so important that it's required.
Yeah, I think in a nutshell, our equity work as outlined very globally tonight is just honestly like a sliver of the work we do to help all kids achieve. And so if we really wanted to do an audit of where our money is spent, we would have it across the spectrum, not just in equity, but around our coaching structures, around our reading, around our comprehensive literacy model. You know, I could go on and on about the academic sort of supports and the scale, the continuum of money spent. I would say I'm not claiming that equity, in essence, is going to solve all of our problems. I think at the core of AVID, as mentioned tonight, although culturally relevant teaching is an instructional practice strand in AVID, what Mrs. Higgins mentioned at North around the core components of writing, inquiry, collaboration, organization, reading, like all of those, I have a line item for AVID in the budget as well. So I think it's a collaboration with all of those things with teachers. I feel like I just want the moment to say that it is critically important that although our community is perhaps divided in this area that has been politicized, that to me, the calling now more than ever is for parents to continue to be equal partners with school, community, and home so that all kids can be successful. We want every child that steps into our school building to be successful. As a parent, as a teacher, and as an administrator, this is a strong community that should come together for that same goal. And that is my hope, that we can have these transparent conversations and talk about what we really need to do for all kids so that all Waukesha kids can be successful. And we always want our schools on the state report card to be moving into that green and have all our schools being significantly exceeding or meeting expectations. That's always the goal. Those are just some of the things like I'll think of something else tonight probably as I'm processing, but those are just some of the thoughts I have.
I could just follow up. I think we all want all kids to be successful. I think there was some confusion at the workshop that perhaps some people were making comments or statements that they weren't. I think it's a question about how we get there and what's under the hood. I mean, again, given the dues that we pay to different organizations, $6,000, $4,000 for trainings are not huge numbers. Until we dig into this a little bit, I'm not going to get too specific, but there are elements of the training that we've made mandatory that basically teach people that we're all racists and we need to find the racists among us. We need to pull these people out, and we need to. There are threads embedded in some of this training that I think some educators are pretty frustrated about, and I think people in our community, when they dig into the content of some of this, are concerned about. That doesn't mean that 95% of the rest of it is great, but some of those themes and undertones or the messages of people delivering the training can be confused with what we're trying to accomplish, and that's something that, for me personally, I think if we're going to require things, we have to make sure that they're appropriate. And I think that's also where some of the confusion comes in around what is this? And there's more. And I'm not going to get into it, but what are we teaching our educators? Are we teaching them tools and strategies, or are we teaching them how to have swag? And I think that's come up in the training. So where do we go with that? Why are we paying for it?
Mr. Zenobia.
I didn't know if there was anyone wanted to comment to follow up with that. To Dr. Piasek's point, we're picking on this slide here and Dr. Holly because he's the only thing that we've seen up to this point as far as this type of training. There's some things that are very divisive, and that pours gas at an issue like CRT, which again is everybody's got different definitions. We heard some here tonight. In a roundabout way, just from the speakers we heard here tonight, I heard a shred of truth in every one of the speakers tonight. In something that they said, a point they made, and all of that has to be considered. However, want diversity of thought and training, I mean, an obvious question to me is why have we picked the same guy 3 years in a row? Given what now we know. That's a general comment. This is something that we spoke about the other day, Ms. Landish. You had mentioned to me your budget or your working budget. And in looking at these numbers here, a lot smaller than some of these numbers. And again, to Dr. Piasek's point, why can't we, as a board, look at some of these things and use the policies we already have in place maybe to do better with the funds that we are using in some regards? And I'm not saying that a good job has not been done. I'm not saying that everybody's not doing their best, because everything I've seen is the opposite. Everybody's doing hard work here, and I think the community appreciates that and understands that. But the problem with this here for many people is just don't know what's going on, and if we're going to spend money and we have some latitude to spend it, why can't we look in other areas across the board? I mean, I can't think that anybody here would not take a better solution if one was presented. I'm not presenting those tonight, don't have those, but they must exist in some areas.
Mr. Como.
Sorry, Jen. Thank you for waving and reminding me. I was afraid that I was going to spill my water again and fry out the mic if it was on. First of all, this topic is a very sensitive topic. And I truly appreciate how we've had a very respectful conversation, discussion last week, this week. I believe we shouldn't be forcing anything forward too fast. I know you had perhaps highlighted that we might have something before this board in September for approval. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. I think we have a very large spectrum of comments that we have received, whether it's via email or comments that have been made by our citizens. And although they can be polarizing, I do think that this community, and one of the reasons why I think we all live in this community, is Waukesha is a great community. And we live here because of that. And a big part of that is our schools. And so I appreciate that the parents want to be heard in this. I appreciate that the students want to be heard in this. I appreciate that the teachers want to be heard in this, the staff, administration, and board members. So it's going to take all of us working together in a very respectful manner to kind of get through this. And I don't necessarily see this is an event and there's an end point. This is a process, okay? And we've been talking about achievement gaps for a long time and different strategies and approaches of how to close those gaps. And those strategies have changed over time. And I think we've identified this as potentially one part of a strategy for closing the achievement gap. But it's only a part, as Jody started to allude to, that there's many facets to student achievement. And closing the gaps is just part of overall student achievement and getting our students to a point where they're ready to either go into the workforce, to go into college, maybe a 2-year community college, possibly go into the military. It's very different for each student and the family situations. And I think one of the things that I've been hearing is people want all students to succeed. And I hope that as we have these discussions over the course of the next several months, and it will be for years, and it will be ongoing, that we uphold the respect that we've seen so far. Let's make sure that we're honest in our dialogue. That doesn't mean it won't be difficult. There can be very separate points of view on opposite ends of the spectrum, and I like how we've started this discussion. My hope is that we will continue to provide clarity and, as Mr. Zenobia had mentioned last week, transparency, and today, transparency. I know this administration is dedicated to transparency, and that's going to be key. We need to be working with facts, not rumors. We need to be able to dialogue with one another, so we need to make sure that we have definitions that are common and we know what we're talking about. So there's a lot of work that we have in front of us. I've been pleased with where we've started. This is going to take some time, and it's not an event; it's a process.
Anything else?
Sure.
Yes, Ms. Roddy.
Thank you. Kind of following off following up with both what my colleague just said, that this is only one facet of one tool that we're using to close achievement gaps. Can you give examples of other facets that we use?
I mean, the most important predictor that comes to my mind are two things. Number one is the guaranteed and viable curriculum, and number two is the teacher in front of the student. Those are the two highest predictors of success for any child in any system across the nation. So Mrs. Herman alluded to the guaranteed and viable curriculum through our curricular design process. And so first and foremost is that we guarantee that every child have that Tier 1 universal level of the rigors expected to be successful post-high school in whatever they choose to do. And then secondly is putting a teacher in front of them that is able to deliver that guaranteed curriculum.
Anything else? Mr. Zenobia.
Just to follow up to Mrs. Roddy's question. And the two things you outlined there were excellent. I thought, when Ms. Roddy asked it, that maybe it was in addition to something like equity, or is there another social emotional learning, these other areas that are also being used to address those things?
So if you were to look at the system from what its foundation is, Ms. Landish referenced the two foundational pieces, the curriculum, the teaching and learning piece. And when those come short for students, then we begin to implement the interventions that we have in our system. We have a lot of interventions in the area of math and reading that will help get kids caught up, that will help address achievement gaps. We have a full special ed program that serves nearly 2,000 students in our district. That is an achievement gap that we have to address. We provide opportunities for students in our system around breakfast and lunch and backpacks, school supplies, things of that nature. All of that goes to address achievement gaps as well. We serve, I don't know where our numbers ended up this year, but historically about 300 students who are homeless in our system. We have 2 shelters in our community for sure, maybe 3, that we deal with a high volume of students who come in and out. And we have a lot of services in place to try to meet those kids. We have developed all of our staff in the area of trauma-informed care. Mr. Pinion's presentation a couple months ago around mental health was a component of it. We have the social and emotional learning curriculum, 4K, and then by the end of next year, 12 that we are through 12th grade that we're implementing in our system. All of those are steps to address an achievement gap. But it does begin where Ms. Land just started. It was the guaranteed and viable curriculum and the teacher who's delivering it. That's where it starts. Our partnerships with parents are crucial. One of the biggest steps that we've taken in the last few years is taking our 4-year-old kindergarten program from a centralized downtown site and moved it into our neighborhood schools. That's provided more access. This past year there was a dip in enrollment because of COVID, we believe, but that's provided more access to more students at that early learning level. There was a study done, I think it was 45 years ago, where they studied the effects of early learning on the impact of IQ indicators in children. They found that early learning had no impact on IQ, but it had tremendous impact between the study group and the control group on what were their post-secondary outcomes. 10 years after high school, 20 years after, up to 40 years after high school, fewer people who went through a good early learning program were employed, had college education. Fewer people were incarcerated, in trouble with the law. So everything that we do from 4-year-old kindergarten through 12th grade, from the general classroom experience to all of the specialized opportunities, our dual language program as one, is aimed at trying to have a better student outcome and address that achievement gap.
Dr. Piasek.
Trying to be respectful of the rest of you, I apologize. Just to follow up on the dual language program, which I think is excellent. I was reminded by a parent recently, we have about 11% of families who speak Spanish at home. And this just makes me ask, what are some of the things that we can do that are easy that can kind of embrace the diversity within our district? And one example I just want to share is, at least at Butler Middle School, I'm aware of this problem that sixth graders are required to take like a quarter of a foreign language. It's either French or Spanish. They used to be able to choose what language they wanted to take, and now they're kind of randomly assigned based on what's available. But I'm aware of probably at least 15 students at this point who have been required to take French, who would have preferred to take Spanish. So that to me seems like an area where if we wanted to encourage cultural understanding and respect and values, and we have a high percentage of Spanish-speaking families in our district, why would we force a sixth grader to take French if they wanted to take Spanish? I'm assuming it's a teacher allocation problem, but there's little things like that, and I just raise it as an example because I think it's a really easy thing potentially to fix, but maybe that's an unintended consequence of just the system that we have. But are there other things like that where we can encourage and drive cultural awareness and respect and inclusion that doesn't involve, massive programming?
Mr. Como.
I do know one example of a step that we've taken recently where we have encouraged English-speaking families to join the dual language program. I don't think that was at all the schools, but I believe at Banting we have that as an option. Are there other schools that are doing that? And one of the things that happens is you have these English-speaking students interacting with English as a second language students starting out in kindergarten, going through fifth grade, and eventually they're winding up speaking both English and Spanish together. And I know that having opened that up to English-speaking has been something that we've done in the past.
Yeah, so what you're referring to is the two-way dual language. We started in the fall. This is written down because I clearly would have no clue when we started this if off the top of my head. But in the fall of 2009 is when we had our first kindergarten class. And so the two-way dual language classes are comprised of half English speakers and half Spanish speakers in terms of their native language. So if that's what you're referring to.
I think that's probably one of our best examples of how we're trying to bring cultures together, in our district. I know people who have participated in those programs who have really have very positive things to say on that. I think it's been relatively effective. I agree with Kelly that, if there are things that we can do that might be simple, straightforward things. I don't know if anything is ever simple and straightforward. Have you ever presented those?
Simple and straightforward. That's on next month's agenda.
There you go. Have you ever used those words? But I agree. If we could take a closer look at, are there some things that we can do that is not like starting up an entirely new program to be to have an impact here. It'd be nice if we could identify some of those things.
I just want to say something, if I can, to Kelly's comment. I hate to talk specific about a school without having the full information, but I do appreciate your example about Butler. I think that rings a bell with the way that we had the wheel structured at the middle level, and we are now, that's why one of the reasons we did, not the main reason, but we have a middle school schedule change in process because the intended use of the wheel was a barrier for some students, and so I'm hoping that structural change, which we now are implementing, would prevent something like this from happening in the future. Again, I don't want to talk specifics because I'm not sure about what happened there, but...
And it was relatively recent because we went through it with different kiddos, but, if I could, just related to what Mr. Como just said, I think that's where maybe we have a huge opportunity and where I think also some of the angst is coming on behalf of the community members. We talked about the district equity leadership team, and I think that transparency, not only around the messaging and things that we're putting out to the public, but the work of that team and ensuring that, I think there are probably a lot of people with great ideas out there about how we could drive inclusion without creating a hostile environment related to racism. And I think we all want the definition of equity that was in our belief statement. We all want children of all backgrounds to succeed. So what other ideas are out there? And I think we've all kind of struggled with, is that in a citizens advisory committee? Is it a board committee? Are we violating open records or open meetings laws with that? Are we giving the appropriate updates? And so I think looking at the structure of that and making sure that the community partner representation in that committee is balanced. And that doesn't mean that there's a problem with who's on it. It's more a question of, is it balanced? I've heard from a lot of people who are either on the committee or value the committee, and they're 100% bought in because they've been part of the conversation. And I think there's just a gap there in terms of, how does everybody else feel? And are we feeling like there's a group that's running out ahead and making decisions and maybe doesn't represent the whole community? And I value and appreciate that there's a representative for every school, and I think that's great that every school is represented. But does that represent the whole community?
Mr. Coleman.
Dr. Siebert, can you comment on the makeup of that group? And I thought that since, as part of the foundation year, I thought you were looking to possibly expand that committee. Can you talk a little bit to that and what your thoughts are there?
Sure. So certainly it was Ms. Landish and I were happy to support Dimitri in getting that group off the ground and felt it was important that we be part of it to assist in its development. It was in its first year, and so we wanted to start with staff and try to build it that way. We included the alumni as a way to try and learn from their experience as students of color within the district. And the goal was, and certainly now Ms. Rogers is going to take over leadership of that, and we'll continue to support her and work with her, but the goal was in time to add additional members to the committee. But with any committee, you want to get it off the ground and you want to have a little bit of foundational success first before you start to bring in additional people. That was at least the discussion that we had. And as Ms. Landish said, we met 9 times for an hour and a half, so we didn't have an extensive amount of...
Sure. So do you think we'll continue down that path then to expand?
Certainly we'll work with Ms. Rogers, and if she's supportive of that, which I think she will be, we would love to move in that direction. Yes.
Okay. I appreciate that.
How does the size of the DELT team compare to like the Curriculum Advisory Council?
Pretty comparable. In fact, we need to, again, re-engage with our district curriculum council members as well. A few people have dropped off, and I think the pandemic didn't help with that. So we look to kind of re-engage some parent stakeholders that perhaps weren't as active as we wanted them to be. Again, both of these are just teams that help us give ideas around the work. Just to be clear, none of these working teams are necessarily, approval or action. That's when everything would come to you, but certainly recommending and giving stakeholder input. I think of other groups similar would be like the Superintendent's Advisory Council that Dr. Siebert is, I believe, starting next year around, one parent representative from each school. So, with 24 schools, if there's a rep for each school, no matter what team it's on, you're talking about 24 to 27 or 30 members if you get a parent rep or a student rep involved as well.
Mr. Como.
Yeah, and just to kind of give more of a broader picture, and the Superintendent's Advisory Council of the parents, one from each school, that's been around for a lot of years. We just didn't maybe have it in your transition year coming in. But there's work from the administration always comes it gets up to the board eventually to make changes. Sometimes it takes a long time. Sometimes it's months. Sometimes it's years as to have it. It's trickle up, I guess, or push up eventually over time. So in that, and that's where our committee and board agendas are developed. What are those things that are most important to our district to move it forward, to keep us moving in the direction of improving student achievement? And sometimes these works take a long time, and topics take a long time to come up. And so this is just one example of one committee that we talked about tonight. I just wanted to give that broader picture.
Dr. Sieberden, besides expanding the committee, do you have any thoughts on ways that the committee could report out, or would they report to you or someone else and that report is given at a committee meeting? Do you have any thoughts on where that might go?
I think we can talk about that, and it might fit very nicely in this committee for regular report outs. And I think it was just, again, it was a goofy year. We got the committee off the ground. We met 9 times, and it's something that we certainly can grow into, I think, and certainly can do that.
And I'm just looking at myself, and I can blame myself for not knowing exactly what has gone on with that committee. I could have been more involved. I could have asked more questions along the way, and I didn't do it. So if there's a avenue that I know that I could, go to, or a contact person, or someone that I could connect with, and also know that there's a reporting out, I think that would benefit me as a board member.
And I think more of a reporting out, as you're describing, or we could do here, would be good. Ms. Landish did, during last year, have several different blog posts on it, and also a couple of board updates on the work of the District Equity Leadership Team, but I think we can take it up a notch from there too.
And I think it'd be really good for the people that we have in our audience, or a way to get that out into the community to, share the happenings of that committee as well, because we do have a lot of very interested people here that are giving up a lot of time, which they could be doing something else, but they're here tonight because they care. And I just think that would be a big step forward.
I'm just curious if there's any opportunity to consider that the Curriculum Council and the Equity Team have common interests and don't need to be separate. Or is it unique and different enough that we need to have both? I mean, we're talking about CRT here at the TNL committee meeting, so I'm assuming maybe do the same.
My initial thought would be the work is too expansive to have, like what our district curriculum council currently does, and Ms. Herman mentioned this in the curricular adoptions. I mean, in the design processes that we have with the curriculum and the taxation, in essence, the workload it puts with groups, it is a lot of work. And so then to merge something that would be like sort of an instructional practices piece as opposed to like the curriculum piece would be a lot for any team to take on.
And it would slow things down, honestly. Our curricular team, it takes sometimes a couple of years to develop things. So that's why I was trying to express before, that things don't happen in these nice, neat packages that only take 1 week to talk about. When we have a new curriculum being brought forward to us, it's usually a couple of years worth of work by a team. So I kind of see where you're going with efficiency. Maybe.
Yeah, I'm just asking the question.
I don't know.
What I'm hearing is, there's a whole bunch of groups where we've got 25 to 50 people coming together on committees, and I'm just trying to simplify that to some degree. I think what I'm hearing is that what we teach is different than how we teach. But I think that's of interest to the community. How is math going to be taught through the lens of culture? Because that's a hot topic these days. What are we going to do about advanced classes? That's a hot topic these days. So I think they do come together.
They do, and that is part of the curricular design process. So any part of that decision-making piece that would involve that would come up through the district curriculum council, just as part of the planning and implementation process.
Mr. Zenobia.
Back to the, really on both fronts of the curriculum council and the DELT team. Just to understand where the district equity leadership team is at the moment. For the past year, they have met and they've come up with really what we had seen on the website. They've gone through some training as well as the teachers have. But I mean, we have a teacher from each school on the committee. Are we to believe there's been no implementation of what the team has discussed?
We have not. So in year one, there was no charge to go back to the building and implement anything in year one. We have started to talk about what year 2 and 3 could look like as far as that goes. But year one, as I mentioned, the team accomplished basically three things during the meeting time this year. We identified the top stakeholder themes in which parents, teachers, students, administrators, etc., thought that we could focus around. We needed a common language, and we needed a common mission and vision. And then the last thing was working on an adult learning framework around our equity work in terms of, as I mentioned, our VAB, which is validate, affirm, build, and bridge. So we really, for the second half of the year, worked on identifying an adult learning framework so teachers could see what sort of a best instructional practice looks like in terms of culturally responsive teaching. So that is as far as we got for, 9 meetings, and it's not, nobody was rushing with any work, but they weren't poking either. It was just, intentional, bringing back, getting feedback, talking to stakeholders. But we never had something this year that they brought back to their buildings. The goal, and we have started to talk about, and we need to do this in Mrs. Rogers' transition, is talk about how that person could be sort of that lead mentor in the buildings to get a consistent understanding and a consistent message to buildings next year. But we're just not there yet with even developing an agenda for year 2. So that's the work this summer. As Dr. Siebert mentioned, is to really look at the roster of participants, looking to see if we are ensuring that we're engaging all voices to be heard, and really what the work of year 2 with what we want to accomplish.
So a follow-up to that would be the curriculum council is about the same size as far as people go, correct? I mean, it's roughly the same size. How often, if ever, is that council shaken up to the point new members come on, the makeup of those people change? Does that happen in curriculum? Does it happen yearly, or have it been the same people for many years?
That has not been a consistent group. And again, for whatever reason, I think time of day and the pandemic hit us. We have not had consistent representation on that district curriculum council, and that was one of our goals this summer for the teaching and learning team, again, to sort of re-recruit people, including more parents, different parents for that team, which we now, I think my team totally left me, but I think I think we meet only 3 times a year, where the structure currently of the district equity leadership team is that we meet once a month from 4:30 to 6 p.m. And then the district curriculum council only meets 3 times a year. And we scheduled it at the time when we knew we would be at the point of wanting to recommend curriculum for this committee to look at. So they're strategically placed according so that we can garner the feedback we need from that group, come back and make changes, and then the recommendation to this committee for decision making.
In addition to expanding, and I don't know who to direct this to, in addition to potentially expanding DELT, is it possibly something to consider to shake the team up? Or as far as the people who are on it? And I don't know how that looks, but I'm just curious if we want diverse opinions, is that something to consider?
I think we always consider that. I mean, I would say in year 2, even looking at that roster, and I don't have it in front of me, there's probably at least 3 people that are not coming back either because they said they chose to step down or they're not with us anymore. So it's not, I would say teams are very fluid just all over the district. I don't think there's, I can't think of many working teams that there is not fluidity with.
Thank you.
Anything else? Ms. Roddy.
Thank you. For some comments, I appreciate the questions brought up by Dr. Piasek and Mr. Zenobia. Good questions. What data are we showing for our ROI? The example of Whittier. What are we implementing and practicing? And I think in that presentation that Whittier had given, I believe that you're referencing to, Whittier had said that they had the idea of the smaller class sizes for multiple years, and their reports were showing it's not working the way we want it to. We're going to be adjusting next year. So I think that's a little bit of showing what's being practiced and what's going to be changed based off of those results or lack of results. Dr. Piasek, I appreciated your thoughts on just the small steps and what we can do. And I know for me, like everything else, I think those small steps start in the home. And obviously we're not, we don't have dominion over everybody's individual homes, but things like just broadening our circles, where we're at in churches and community groups, and I realize that there's comfort and commonality and like-mindedness, and we want that. But I think for our families, they wanted to start something. It's those little steps like that. For us as board members, for myself, I guess I should say, being in the schools more often, being one-on-one with our teachers who are with all of our students on a daily basis, and our boots on the ground. They see everything, and they'll see the gaps, and so I know for me that's going to be a step going forward to be more in touch with them. But I do appreciate the questions and conversations this evening.
I guess I want to comment that I really appreciate the overall level of discussion and respect that Mr. Cuomo alluded to. I've been a part of some other meetings that I would question that was the point or the goal. And I'm appreciative of the people that we have come out tonight. I know you care. I know you want to work with us, and I would encourage you to continue to stay involved. We've heard tonight that this is going to be a slow process. It's not going to happen overnight. We're not going to, decide on anything tomorrow. It will take time. We've heard some, I think, really good ideas tonight on ways that we can move forward and changes that we can implement. And just to let you know that we're open to what you're thinking as well, and we encourage you to keep us involved and keep connected with us, because that's how we're able to come up with the type of program that we'd like to see eventually fully implemented in this district. It will take time, it will take patience, it will take respect, and all those have been demonstrated by everyone in this room tonight, and I can't thank you enough for that. I really do appreciate it sincerely. And just all the professionalism that I've seen continually from our administrators, our staff, how well prepared they are. They're put on the spot with a lot of things. We don't usually have time to question them ahead of time. But I felt that you answered the questions directly, honestly, with transparency, and like you always have. And I know that will continue, and I want to thank you very much for that. This is not an easy issue for any of us. But I look around at what's happening in other districts, and I don't see what happened tonight being emulated in very many others. And I'm very proud of that, and you should be proud of that as well. Thank you. Okay. We are moving on to the boardroom technology update. Thank you, Mr. Schloman, for being here tonight. He was listed somewhere in the information that I received in the board packet as the CIO, and I'm like, okay, what does that mean? For those of you that don't know, CIO is the Chief Information Officer. So whether that title is liked by Mr. Schloman or not, he is the Chief Information Officer in our district. And I was glad that he verified that I was correct in what I thought that title was. He's obviously much more than that, especially during a year of a pandemic. He was the go-to person time and time again when constant things were happening at warp speed in the district. And somehow he's still here. I'm not sure. But I don't think too much rattles Mr. Schloman. And his professionalism shines every day from what I've seen in the work with him over the years. So we asked him to come to our Teaching and Learning Committee meeting tonight. And I'm pleased to read that he's already jumped on some things and implemented some things. He's ready to answer any questions that we have after he provides his presentation. Also, just a note that we used to have a separate technology committee, and now that's been intertwined with the Teaching and Learning Committee, so they will not be separate committees anymore. We will have Mr. Schloman periodically reporting to the Teaching and Learning Committee and go from there instead of duplicating some of that information because it used to come actually to both groups. So welcome, CIO of the district, Mr. Schloman. I will turn it over to you, and I'm sure you'll answer our questions at the end or throughout the presentation as needed. So thank you very much for being here.
Dietz, per Mr. Como's request, this is the simple and straightforward portion of the agenda. So it's going to be quick, fast. I think some of the issues we've had with the boardroom technology in the pandemic was related to our social distancing. We had to reconfigure the boardroom in a way that it was not intended to be configured, and we did that fairly quickly without a lot of technical or expert audio advice. So we ran into some issues with that. Now that we're back in our normal configuration, I think things are operating better.
If you remember to turn your mic on. Sorry.
Yeah, that's right. And not spill your water.
Right.
But yeah, so we're going to talk about some of the things that we're working on. Have been working on and we're going to continue to work on. So one of the main things in the boardroom here is everything funnels back to that control room back there. Genevieve runs the control board that controls the cameras, but that all ties back into a central rack back there in the room. All of our microphones here on the desk, they go into a processor that processes our audio signals and ties it into an encoder that encodes the video and sends it up to YouTube live stream, and it also records it so that it automatically, the recording ends up on YouTube in the morning automatically. That's all done automatically. If you were involved with the boardroom as late as just 5 years ago, we were manually recording DVDs and loading them up, and before that we had VCR tapes, and so things are a lot better than they used to be. But so one of the things that we're working on right now is we're going to upgrade that processor in there so that the audio, we have better control of the audio, have more channels, more fidelity on our microphones. We've chosen to stay with this style of microphone and this particular microphone because of the ability for the individuals to turn themselves on and off, so that we're not getting interference, when the speakers are speaking by somebody accidentally saying something or maybe coughing or something like that. So we've tried to work with, if you look at that microphone up there, we've tried to use more of an area microphone. That one is actually disconnected because it just really wasn't effective, and we were picking up a lot of noise from the crowd and things. Another thing that we have that deal with in this room is we have speakers that are basically shooting down at us from the ceiling, and if you've ever been in an area where you've had bad feedback, that's one of the reasons, is because your microphones are picking up direct speakers. So with that, we can't really pick up a sort of a zone microphone. So we're staying with this microphone style, the on-off button, but we are upgrading the processor that takes that audio out to the to the room and also out to the YouTube channel. Because YouTube is the widely used streaming platform out there, plus it's also free for us. So that was a big factor. We used to have to pay for our streaming service, and we decided better than that, and it was free. So trying to save money, we like it when those things align. We also are going to be installing 2 new wireless mics in the boardroom. The old mics are out of compliance with the FCC. They no longer really are legal because of the FCC frequencies that have been reclaimed. Luckily, we're not picking up interference, and the FCC is not coming to are on order, and we should have them in soon. WebEx room kit that you're all very familiar with, that's going to be permanently mounted in the room. And then it's going to be able to be tied in with the up there, so we'll be able to. Genevieve's giving me signals back there. So okay, she's good at her job. So that's going to be tied in basically, so that we'll be able to use it anytime we want. Moving forward, we'll be able to potentially have board members remote and also presenters remote.
So that would be a better experience also for the audience, right?
Correct.
It's all, since it's integrated.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, we won't have the problems with feedback and I can't hear you and things like that. And then the last bullet on our agenda that I'm going to talk about are the overflow rooms, 109 and the one upstairs. We've experienced what we were doing is we were using the YouTube stream before. That was an economical way of doing that because we didn't know how many times we were going to need that. But now we're basically going to take the direct feed from the room here so we don't have the delay. So there's about a 15 or 20 second delay when you're watching YouTube versus the live. That's just what it takes to get up to the satellite, go out to YouTube, come back, and get fed through the internet to you. So we're going to be feeding the direct feed to both of those rooms from the room here. So you're going to be instantaneous, basically, audio and video quality. That is, we're estimating that about the end of August or early September that should be done.
We continue to also have Channel 13 on the Uverse service.
We do have Channel 13 on the cable still. They haven't taken that away from us, but I don't know how long that's going to be before they do. It's no longer, I mean, if you were been around for a lot of years, there was a charter agreement with cable that required them to do that. They're no longer required to do that. but they still provide us that spectrum. But the equipment we feed it to is extremely old, so I'm guessing if that fails or something, they're probably not going to replace it for us. So. Okay. I have no idea how many people watch the actual Channel 13 broadcast. I do have back on how many people watch the YouTube broadcast, and that can be quite high sometimes. But I think in most cases are leaning more towards streaming than they are now towards actually watching Channel 13.
Comments, Mr.
Yeah, Mr's fine. I'm fine with that.
Dr. Piazza.
First of all, I appreciate you sitting here as long as you did. I'm impressed. This is not about what you're doing to make lemonade out of this room. I greatly appreciate that, and I understand how hard it is to get all of this on the same frequency and timing. This room is too small. And I've been saying this for a long time, but when we're in the school year and we have bright lights and we have kids coming in from the schools, I mean, the T&L meeting in particular is always full. And if we're going to move forward with some of the recommended changes to our public speaking policy, that we don't want people crowded behind podiums and things like that, I assume we're spending some good change to make the two other rooms sync with this room. And the fact that we have to have overflow rooms, to me, tells me that should we not just consider a different location? I don't know what's behind that wall. I think it might be HR.
That's Sharon's office, yeah.
And I know the
All in favor?
She's not in there right now.
Knock it down.
That'll teach her.
I'll Chip and Joanna and knock the wall down. So if we're going to make this investment, we're going to be committed to this room for a while. And so I appreciate all that you've put into this. I just think we should maybe just one last time. And I'm alone in this, but I just feel like we've squeezed ourselves in here for a long time. And yep, there are meetings that nobody comes to, but the fact that people might have to sit in an overflow room for a school board meeting, I have a problem with that because I've been in that room and you're not part of the meeting.
Has there been consideration of that, Dr. Siebert or Mr. Schloman, of looking at a separate location or a rotating location, or what would that entail?
We used to, that was before my time, but we used to do the traveling road show. Right. And it really was that. It was a significant amount of equipment that had to be moved and set up. Now it's a lot easier than it was then because we had analog cameras with big cables and huge tripods and things. So it would be easier now, but it's still, you're not going to get the same quality of broadcast at, let's say, if you went to a high school and set up there. And it would take multiple people to do that. So we'd have to have multiple camera operators. And Genevieve can run all 5 cameras right from the control board. We would need actual camera operators, maybe 2. Traveling, show that we're moving around. Now, if we chose another room somewhere else that was bigger, we could outfit it like this room. Now, the cost for that would be a fair amount higher than what we're just doing in the upgrade. I think the upgrade is going to cost us about $17,000. This whole room probably is close to $50,000 when you think about all of the different things that you have to install. Could move this equipment, some cost involved with that. So could we relocate to another room? We absolutely could. Another factor that we deal with here is the ADA accessibility. So we can't go upstairs really because we don't have an elevator here. That's
$1 million, right?
Yeah, that's $1 million there. Although I'm sure George, the janitor, would love if we put an elevator in. But sorry, the custodian. I shouldn't say janitor. Well, that's very old school. But yeah, so there's a lot of factors. Now, we could do it. That definitely could. We just have to consider all those different factors.
And I think what Kelly's asking, and anyone else chime in, or what I'm asking too, is just to look at some other options and just see what
I'd
would
be more than
available.
happy to price that out and figure out if we had some alternative locations. What would that cost us, or how would we do it?
I feel like with the investment that we've made in our middle schools, especially, I mean, the Les Paul cafeteria is beautiful. It's ground level,
Right.
has a screen and a monitor from what I could see.
Centrally located.
Yeah. And again, I understand there's trade-offs to all of this. I just feel like if we're going to make that investment, we're kind of making the decision that we're going to stay here. And I don't know what happens next. How big?
I don't think it would hurt for him to look into it.
I can certainly look into it. Are we thinking about Les Paul cafeteria? Is that what we're?
Oh, I'm just throwing it out there. Butler has an elevator
Okay.
now, so.
Yeah, and it's ground level. I mean, I don't know. I think that would be one possibility. I think it'd be better than maybe multiple sites.
But choosing one site, I think, definitely would be better than multiple sites.
Right, right. Because otherwise people wouldn't remember where to go. I mean, that would be, board members wouldn't remember where to go.
They'd have to read the website.
Right.
That would be terrible.
Right, right. Mr. Cole.
Well, one of the advantages of when we had the traveling technology, by the way, which was horrible. I mean, there were literally some meetings that nobody could hear anything. And the public was, you thought the public was frustrated this last year? That compared to nothing when there was no audio. Not necessarily on purpose, it's just that's what happened. Nobody could be understood. During the days when we traveled, we would travel every other month, and the advantage of that was we went to each school. It would take about 2 to 3 years to go through all the schools, and 3 to 4 years actually to do the rotation. But we got to meet the staff, we got to meet the parents, we got to meet some students, and that was fantastic. So we would extend our meetings by about an hour to an hour and a half. Board members would show up early, and we would have that essentially chance to interact with that community. I thought that was a real positive.
Had a tour.
Had a tour. Yep.
Highlighted some of the things that they were working on.
And they would get to pick to what they wanted to speak on and what they wanted to show off, at those locations. So that traveling scenario was the advantage of that. So I just thought I'd chime in there. We have tried to broadcast, I think, from some auditoriums, and there's some challenges there. It's not like you can just plunk yourself down to anywhere where there's an AV kind of system. It just doesn't work like, in 2 seconds you connect that system up to what you need to have for the recordings. So, but I'm interested in what options might be out there too. However, I do think we need to kind of think through the logistics of it and what that means to our community. Are we playing favoritisms if we choose one auditorium over another? Where is it located? Those kinds of things.
I think we picked the right person to do the job. Or the right CIO, Chief Information Officer, who is in charge of, for those of you that don't know, he's in charge of anything technology related.
Copiers today.
I'm not surprised.
60 copiers in the next week. So.
So it sounds like your plan, your original plan was to start right away, and we've kind of put a wrench in that.
Well, I've got the equipment on order. That equipment's going to be useful wherever we go. So we just won't install it. We'll just hold on to it until we figure out what we're going to do.
It'd be interesting to get some public comments about that or public feedback about that too. If there's a way that we can do that. I don't know how we can do that, but.
I could do a survey, but I don't think that's good.
I think you just did it.
What was that?
I think you just did it. Anybody's still watching at this point.
Maybe the Freeman or someone can cover
Email
it.
Greg.
Yeah, that's true. You could email me. That's fine.
Maybe me once in a while.
But I think to get the word out that it's an option and being considered in whatever shape or form we do that might help us in our decision making. Anything else for Mr. Schloman? Okay. I want to thank everyone for your involvement and participation this evening. The next Teaching and Learning Committee meeting will be held Tuesday, August 3rd at 6 p.m. here in the boardroom. With that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Oh, Kelly.
I'm sorry.
Dr. Piazzik, sorry.
We skipped one thing.
Oh, yeah,
is
recommendations.
other business, and I apologize, but
I'm sorry.
I do have two things I'd like to at least put on the table. There was reference tonight to a program called Character Strong. Could we learn some more about that? And then one thing that I thought was going to be included in our board workshop that I think maybe doesn't have a home at this point is a follow-up on the restraint and seclusion activities and insight. I know it's come to the policy committee, which is probably not the appropriate place to talk about what's actually going on. And since we didn't cover it in the workshop, would it be appropriate to bring it to this committee?
After the policy is approved?
Well, the policy is related to some changes to regulations,
Okay.
but we were going to talk more about implementation
Okay.
and actual happenings in the school environment. I was under the impression we were going to get into more detail at the workshop about that, but it didn't make the agenda.
Dr. Cook, you have any
Sir, happy
advice
to
for that?
present on that. The scope of seclusion and restraint in the grand scheme of discipline and behavior management is pretty small. So if we could if the topic were more broad, we could provide you, I think, we could put seclusion and restraint in perspective for the committee as to where it fits in the line of proactive and reactive strategies that we're using with students.
I'm fine with that. It just came up as part of our policy committee discussion that we were being asked to approve a policy that was kind of the end of the conversation. And so while we can move that forward based on some regulatory changes, it would be good to understand the rest of the story. So
from the two of you, your recommendation, would it be to look at the policy and develop that first, or develop that after the training?
the policy is coming to the board tomorrow for approval.
The question that we had at committee was, could we have a workshop on discipline, or could we have a workshop on behavior? That's where that started. So,
Mr. Como.
And we did have one. What was it? 4 years ago. So it's been a while. 4 or 5.
4 years ago on
4 or 5 years ago. I mean, it's a pretty substantial topic. It's not a 15-minute topic. It's very complex, multiple parts to it. Maybe we need to talk on, is a workshop better? Can we abbreviate it for T&L in a short amount of period of time? I just don't know those
Could
questions.
be viewed by other board members.
Yeah,
or-
and I think we're going to rely on our administration to help us with, can we skinny it down or not? Or do we need 2 hours on it? We had a 4-hour workshop last week with the board. There just wasn't enough time to put more topics. There's actually several topics that people bring up during the year that we have to kind of pick and choose. And
That's fine. I think just the understanding was that when we talked about it at the policy committee meeting, the understanding was that we were going to talk about it at the committee or at the workshop, and we didn't. So it's okay if it doesn't come to this committee, if it's too much for this committee. I know there's a report that we submit towards the end of the year that would come here or somewhere anyway, or at least would get presented to the board.
report would be submitted to you in a Friday update. It would just be submitted as a memo. And then at that same time, that report would be submitted to the state indicating our numbers.
And we've always been able to ask questions on that report.
Yep.
I guess I think it'd be a good idea to, like Dr. Piazzik said, just to somehow get that information. Some
Up
sort
for
of
discussion when
Yes.
the report is generated?
Yeah, yeah. And then maybe also to have some of that, an overview of the training that's existing to talk about that as well. I think it could start at this at this meeting, and if it needs to go bigger than that, it could, or other members could be invited, other members could view, the recording of this meeting to get their thoughts and ideas as well. But I think we could accomplish that in a period of time that would fit into this agenda. Yep.
Yeah, so and just to add to that, Mr. Dietz, right, this other business item recommendations for future committee meetings. We normally, I know I've had this in the past with both Kelly and Amanda.
Yeah.
Sometimes we bring it back like right away the next month, right? And sometimes we say, okay, we think it would be better off, and such, and we communicate to the board. So
Sure.
I wrote down those two things, and you and I will
Awesome.
work together to figure out. I also just want to make mention, just looking at the agenda for August 3rd, we currently have just 2 agenda items on for discussion. One is around elementary social studies, and it's the resources update that they've been working towards. And then the other one was a technology update as well from Steve. So I have a feeling, I don't know what you'll bring on August 3rd for an update for them, but that makes sense. So that's only 2 things on the agenda.
Are you
Yeah.
I recommend that we put.
Fair enough.
He gets to go first.
Am I hearing that you want to be first on the agenda?
agree.
Noted. Noted.
Are we holding the curriculum transparency for September?
September, right.
Anything
And then-
else?
Yeah, I'll just say it to save questions also. I'm just processing the evening and the feedback, and I know I made mention out of the gates that we would perhaps, 2 times bring something in front of the board. That always still is our process, 2 times before the board to take action, but I think with Mrs. Rogers' transition and the way that we want to expand ownership around the important equity work and the belief embrace statement, that I would feel more comfortable if we garner more feedback. We always try to say this recommendation is from 1,000 stakeholders, and this is what we're bringing to the board, right? So there's no reason necessarily that we need to bring that on August 3rd right away. I would feel more comfortable if we just, again, with Tiara's transition and pulling in multiple people, solidifying the team roster and things like that, that you'll see it. It just won't be on August 3rd. So.
Anything else? That concludes our meeting. Meeting is adjourned, and like I said, our next meeting is August 3rd.